want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning. It's 6 o'clock on Sunday, the 29th of October. Today, in shock news that's just come in overnight, the star of Friends, Matthew Perry, has died, aged just 54. The US actor, best known for his iconic role as Chandler in Friends, was found dead at his home. And I'm sure many people who grew up with the series and other generations who've watched it all over the globe since, he will be sorely missed.
And the second stage of the invasion has begun. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel's ground invasion of Gaza will signify a long and difficult war. Mark White will bring us all the latest from Tel Aviv.
Well, after the internet and phone connections were cut on Friday, they are gradually being restored, but there has been no let-up in the Israeli bombardment of the Gaza Strip.
100,000 people turn out to protest Israel's bombing of Gaza, calling for a ceasefire on humanitarian grounds. 9 people were arrested, with some incidents being treated as suspected hate crimes.
And Labour are at the centre of a nepotism row as Partygate investigator Sue Gray's son becomes a candidate at the next election in South East London. That's as divisions continue to grow over the party's stance on the conflict in the Middle East.
And across the Atlantic, Donald Trump takes aim at Joe Biden, calling him totally incoherent, claiming the Israel-Hamas war would never have started if he were president.
And Rachel Ayres will have all of your latest weather forecasts.
Persistent rain across Scotland today and sunshine and showers elsewhere with some blustery winds. Join me later for a full forecast with all the details.
And then, of course, for the sport, here's Aidan.
Yes, good morning. South Africa retained the Rugby World Cup on a dramatic night in Paris. And in boxing, did Tyson Fury avoid one of the biggest upsets in sporting history? Find out later this hour.
Well, thank you for joining us this Sunday morning. I'm Anne Diamond.
And I'm Martin Daubney, and this is Breakfast on GB News.
I know there's an awful lot of death and destruction going on in the world at the moment, and we will sadly be reporting on that too. But the news that came in overnight about Matthew Perry is really very shocking indeed. He's died. I mean, he's friend to us all, isn't he? Were you a big fan of Friends?
Well, I must confess, at that time, I was more into laddism, and I was out and about on Friday nights. But it was a part of the fabric of us growing up, and he's just 54. That's a year older than me. So it really makes you think, you know, taken away way too soon. A fantastic talent, very funny guy.
Very funny guy, an incredibly good comic actor. We'll talk more about that. But I think the effect that Friends has had over the years, not just for those who watched it when it was first aired, from the late 1990s, I think, right through to the early 2000s, 10 years of it, I think. But those people, those Friends, had an effect on all our lives, I think. It was a very upbeat... It was a lovely series. It was about young people just being friends and trying to make their way in life. And I don't know if anyone watched the reunion show.
Yeah, 2021.
That's right, where they showed people all over the world and said that it had had a profound effect on them. So I think Matthew's passing will not just be felt in America, in Hollywood, amongst his friends, but frankly all over the world.
Yeah, 10 seasons, 1994 it started until 2004, but it's still on everywhere you go on TV now, around the world, wherever you go in a hotel. I was in Rhodes last week, it's on in the hotel.
Absolutely.
Still,
and it
everywhere.
doesn't even matter if you go all over the world, it doesn't even matter if it's been dubbed into another country, because you know what it's saying. So, yeah, I think as you wake up, you'll be very sad to hear this. Canadian as well, he was, American-Canadian. He was an actor, comedian and producer in the end. Matthew Perry, best known for his role on the US sitcom Friends, has died. Early reports anyway, suggest that he drowned in his jacuzzi at his home.
The 54-year-old actor died at his home in LA after LA police received a call around 4:07 p.m. local time.
And the source who's giving out the news at the moment, including the police, they've said that there is no apparent foul play and no confirmed cause of death, and an investigation is obviously now ongoing.
Well, joining us live now from Los Angeles is showbiz expert Kinsey Schofield. Kinsey, terrible news for us to wake up to here in the UK. What's the latest on the potential cause of death? And tell us a bit more about the huge legacy he leaves behind.
Yeah, that's right. What we do know about Matthew's day is that prior to his death, he had played 2 hours of pickleball. So he was, you know, he was so proud to be sober. He was promoting his sobriety, and he was really challenging his body that he had struggled with throughout the years. I don't know if you remember this, but the abuse took such a nasty toll. He had to undergo 14 surgeries to try to fix the damage done to his stomach lining due to alcohol and opioid abuse, and revealed that he nearly died in 2018 after his colon burst. So this was a man that was proud of his sobriety and was challenging his body up until the day he died. What is devastating to somebody like me, you know, Anne, you're talking about the effect, the positive effect he had on people all over the world, is he died alone, you know, in his jacuzzi. This is a man that touched so many people's lives with his humor and with his skill. And he had sent his assistant off to run errands for 2 hours. When the assistant returned, Matthew had drowned in the jacuzzi. And while Friends was his breakout role, you know, fans across the states also remember him for roles in the 80s and 90s, like Growing Pains, which was a huge show, Beverly Hills 90210. He appeared on that, and that brilliant program, The West Wing. And Friends, it thrust him into movie star status, so much more so than his male co-stars with precious films like Fools Rush In with Salma Hayek and 17 Again with Zac Efron. So he was an incredibly loved personality here in the States and all over the world, and he's going to be greatly missed.
I know tributes are beginning to pour in, and they will continue from all over the world. But what's the reaction of Hollywood? And have any of his friends, the literal friends, have they been in touch at all?
And I don't think we're going to hear from them, not right now. This is an incredibly tight-knit group. Jennifer Aniston is the godmother to Courtney Cox's daughter. These are people that really do spend a significant amount of time with each other and are sincerely friends. I imagine that they are curled up on a couch, loving one another, crying together. I think that this is a sacred time for them. And we are hearing from some co-stars, the woman that played Matthew's mother on Friends. We're hearing from some people that worked with him throughout his life. But that core group, I don't think we're going to hear from them immediately, because they really were. I mean, you could see it on the screen. This was a group of individuals that cared for each other very deeply. And I think that they're probably heartbroken tonight here in the States.
He brought out his memoir only a couple of years ago, didn't he? And it was searingly raw. He really pulled no punches, letting us know how terribly ill he'd been, how terribly he had actually abused his own body with drink and drugs. Is there any indication that that might have been part of the cause of his death?
I do want to stress that law enforcement has said that there were no drugs found at the scene, which I think is important. But you're right, in Friends, Lovers, and The Big Terrible Thing, which was a #1 seller, I think it sold 96,000 copies within its first few weeks in November of 2022. He discussed that struggle with addiction and said I think he estimated that he'd been to rehab about 15 times. But he was so candid with his troubles and helped so many other people that struggled with addiction through his honesty about his struggles with addiction, and even campaigned to the White House to decriminalize addiction. He stressed that it was an illness and not a crime in 2011. So I think that our greatest hope is that it's unassociated. But at the end of the day, if you think about all of the surgeries he's had to go through to recover from that addiction, who knows if something down the line, it was just something that happened based on the repercussions of addiction from long ago.
Kinsey, we'll talk to you later on as well. Thank you so much for joining us right now at this very sad news. I tell you what, though, shall we see him in action at his best? I think we've got a little clip.
This guy was me, and it was me who would learn that it was me who was the best you'd ever had. I'd be going like this.
Super stuff. Well, joining us now is executive producer and comedy scriptwriter Dan Warren. Dan, good morning to you. Thanks for joining us on Breakfast. I want to talk about the script writing of Friends, because it was fantastically tight. It felt like the best writers in the world at that time all joined together, and they had such a natural chemistry together. The humour was genuine from them.
Well, exactly, and it's probably the best ingredients. If you're thinking of the making a cake, it's putting the best actors together, that chemistry, and the chemistry with the script writers. And you've got a room full of 20 people rewriting all the time, basically going through every single process of a dry run through the dress rehearsal, a test rehearsal with an audience. And until it was spot on, until they were happy, they were literally rewriting the whole process. And a lot of the time during the shoot, when you've got the audience reaction, they would rewrite it based on ad-libs that Matthew Perry had made. Script writers can get very sort of defensive over their creativity. They don't like producers, directors or actors criticising it, but in the end they were welcoming him in, because he just channeled that character, and not just for his role, which is unusual, because again, there can be rivalry and everyone wants the funny lines. He would be going, it would be good if David Schwimmer's character does this, and it was just a truly success, and I think one of probably the last of the huge comedy franchises to be so successful. And there's always in the UK people saying American humour is completely different, but Friends just had this global audience. Everyone could understand it. It was like universal language, really.
Well, that's it. Why was it? I mean, because it will be people all over the world who will be affected by the news of his death, because he was globally known in just about every language you can think of as well. It's been dubbed. Why was Friends such a success?
I think, even recently, like last week, I'll have an hour spare, you know, go onto a streaming service and use friends.
It's always
safe,
there, isn't it?
And you just know you're going to enjoy it. You know what's going to happen, but you still laugh. And each time you watch it, it's different elements. And after studying comedy, because obviously I watched it in the 90s and grew up with it. But then once you've studied comedy and looking at it in a different way, even subtle things, how the visual gags and the sound gags, all perfectly crafted to just create this huge comedy. I think it was about 3 years ago. They actually released certain episodes in the cinema for part of a special anniversary. And even on the big screen, you're thinking, well, you know, we've seen it on E4, Channel 4 so many times. Is it going to work? But again, so different.
And something that was incredible, that live studio audience thing, I think, was absolutely key, because there are so many bloopers online where they screw up and they're all laughing so much they can't do the next take, and the audience is in hysterics. Then they go back to the show. So that energy, that high-octane humour was absolutely genuine and in real time.
Yeah, exactly. And in the past, Matthew Perry and his co-stars have said how sometimes it was, you know, combining the theatre to a film TV production because of that live reaction. And there's nothing worse than in-house you've written a script, you think it's really funny, and then it gets panned by the critics. I think the best critics are the public. So when you've got an audience of 200-300 people and the gag hasn't worked, you've got enough time to rewrite. You've got no choice.
Yeah, and of course the finale was very famous for, I think, it was like the biggest audience ever for anything, almost, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it was what they call a Super Bowl moment in the States, where basically all families come together. And from the writing point of view, in America, there's always criticism how these big legacy shows end. Like The Big Bang Theory was criticised; it didn't end properly, and How I Met Your Mother, but Friends, it's something like 98% approval of it. It was the ending everybody wanted. You kind of knew it was going to happen, but at the same time, they still added the surprises.
Yeah, because it was Chandler and Monica had their babies.
And it was twins, yes.
And Ross and Rachel got together.
Yes, she got off that plane, didn't she?
That's right.
Yeah, no, it was a fantastic.
I don't think, we will never really forget it, will we?
No.
It was magic. And very sadly, with the death of Matthew Perry, that magic can't be relived in any way, really, now.
And they were always talking about a reunion and you know, an extra series, but as they said, it was of its time, and if they all came back together, it would not have worked in the way.
Excellent stuff.
Yes, Dan, thanks very much indeed. We'll talk again later. Do let us know what your memories of Friends are. Who is your favourite? What was your favourite moment? Were you a Friends person or a Frasier person? There was always that, wasn't there, going on? But if you've got any lovely way you can share with us your memories of Matthew Perry, love to hear from you. gbviews@gbnews.com. At 6:14, let's move on to the other big news stories of the day. And breaking with historical norms, the International Committee of the Red Cross has called for a humanitarian pause in the fighting in Gaza.
And that's as the Israeli Prime Minister says we are now entering the second phase of the war as ground incursions continue. But in a relief to many, some phone lines and internet connections have now been returned to Gaza after Israel cut them off.
So let's go over now to our security editor, Mark White, in Tel Aviv. Mark, what's the very latest from you?
Well, there has been no let-up in the bombardment of northern Gaza in particular. Every now and again, more pounding of explosions coming from the Gaza Strip in that northern sector. And we're told that there are Israeli troops on the ground. We had a news conference from Benjamin Netanyahu and other members of the War Cabinet last night, in which he said that the second phase is underway, that this will be a long and difficult campaign. And I think that's what we are going to see really over the coming weeks, even into months, is not necessarily those tens of thousands of troops all piling over the border into Gaza at the same time, but these raids that are taking place in very significant numbers, supported by the aerial bombardment to weaken Hamas defences, and then just incrementally you've got these ground incursions taking more and more time, taking out Hamas's ability to fire back, to set booby traps and alike, and also, of course, to gather intelligence about those hostages that are still being held by Hamas. Benjamin Netanyahu held a meeting with families of the 229 people, at least, that we know of who are being held by Hamas. They wanted him to ensure that their families would be kept as safe as possible. How on earth can he do that when he's pushing in with a campaign to take out Hamas? But he said, look, absolutely, it's uppermost in the minds of every single Israeli serviceman and woman as they go into Gaza to try to destroy Hamas.
How significant is the intervention of the International Committee of the Red Cross? It's extremely rare to the point of non-existent for them to comment on wars.
Yes, it's unusual, and it follows, obviously, lots of humanitarian aid agencies have been calling for a ceasefire, including a lot of countries around the world. It has to be said that Israel's allies are not calling for a ceasefire. They are calling for what they call humanitarian pauses, more localised halts in the bombing to allow aid over the border. And certainly today we had the Israeli military spokesman saying last night that there would be an increase in the humanitarian aid supplies coming over the border, that Rafah crossing from Egypt into Gaza today. Didn't specify how many trucks might be able to cross, and of course it's all dependent on what happens. Israel accuses Hamas of popping up in that area with rocket launchers and other terrorist infrastructure. They go after it, and that means it's just not safe for these aid trucks to cross.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. We'll leave it there for the moment and we'll be back with you a bit later on in the programme. Right now, it's 18 minutes past 6, and if you've just joined us, a reminder of our top stories this morning. In shock news overnight, the star of Friends, Matthew Perry, has died, aged just 54. The US actor, best known for his iconic role as Chandler, was found dead at his home. For those of you who grew up with the series, and indeed nearly everybody else around the globe, he will be sorely missed.
And the second stage of the invasion has begun. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel's ground invasion of Gaza will signify a long and difficult war.
And 100,000 people turned out to protest Israel's bombing of Gaza, calling for a ceasefire on humanitarian grounds. 9 people were arrested, with some incidents being treated as suspected hate crimes.
And Labour are at the centre of a nepotism row as the Partygate investigator Sue Gray's son becomes a candidate at the next election in South East London. And that's as divisions continue to grow over the party's stance on the conflict in the Middle East.
And then across the Atlantic, Donald Trump takes aim at Joe Biden, calling him totally incoherent, claiming the Israel-Hamas war would never have started if he were president. So, as we heard there, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer is under a bit more pressure today, as his Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, has found herself at the centre of what even might be called a nepotism row.
Jobs for the boys indeed, because it was revealed that her son has now applied to run as the Labour candidate in the Beckenham and Penge seat in South East London. Sue Gray is known, of course, for being the controversial former civil service tasked with writing the Partygate report.
And that all comes as Keir Starmer's party is growing increasingly rebellious over Labour's stance on the Israel-Hamas conflict. Senior Labour figures in the shadow cabinet, as well as the London Mayor Sadiq Khan and the Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham and Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar, have all called for an immediate ceasefire.
Well, joining us now is political commentator Peter Spencer. Top of the morning, Peter. Always a pleasure. So, as if it weren't obvious enough that they were biased, perhaps, with Sugate landing a plum job as Starmer's chief advisor, now there's jobs for the boys, jobs for her son as a candidate in South East London. Will this damage Keir Starmer?
To be honest, I don't think it'll damage him, particularly because, of course, the Conservative Party are going to be spitting nails about this because those wounds have yet to heal from his mum's take on Partygate, which was pretty damning. And likewise, the Conservatives' allies in Fleet Street will also make as much mischief out of this as they possibly can. But the reality is, this chap has been a Labour activist, no secret about that, whatever, for a long, long time. And I have to say that if he's anything like his mum, he's going to be a pretty formidable operator if he does get to be a Labour candidate. Also, I would say that next to the huge crisis that is potentially facing Keir Starmer over the Israel-Palestinian conflict, this is small beer.
I mean, do you think it's fair to even use the word nepotism? Because he'll have to be selected and then he'd have to be elected, wouldn't he? And as you say, he's well known for being... But this is Sue Gray's son. And also, we've always been told that even though she then went to Labour, she was a person of huge integrity. So maybe it's too much to... Other than raising eyebrows, maybe it's actually too much to say anything more.
Well, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more on all this. I mean, I note that it's the Sun newspaper which is leading this particular story, and it has to be said that the Sun is no great ally of the Labour Party. It seems only yesterday, when Neil Kinnock lost that election, that the Sun the next day ran a headline saying it was the Sun what won it. I mean, you can argue about whether it was Kinnock that lost it, but the fact is, of course, mischief will be made by the Labour Party's enemies, but in the end, I come back to it, you're quite right, it's for the birds, really.
Yeah, but Peter, come on, you must confess, if this had happened on the Conservative side of the camp, the Labour Party would be screaming blue murder, red murder even, about the fact that jobs are being handed out to family members. Liam Conlon...
They're not. Hang on, they're not being handed out, are they? Well, he's going to try and get selected as a candidate.
But he's on the list. It must look. There is obviously the allegation.
I don't wish to interrupt in this.
No, absolutely.
There's obviously the allegation that it is jobs for the boys. But
no, it's not. I don't think it is.
Well, that's the story.
Well, right. Don't let the facts get in the way. But no, surely it's not. It's the fact that eyebrows will raise and it doesn't look good. The optics don't look good. I agree with you there. But and if I were a Tory candidate or whatever, I would be screaming blue murder. But it's sort of pushing it a bit, isn't it, to say it's jobs for the boys?
All right, well, should we let Peter have a comment?
Yeah, go on, Peter. You're the one who should be talking on this.
I come back to what I just said a moment ago. Next to the biggest, probably, challenge to Keir Starmer's authority since he became leader of the Labour Party over the Middle East, this is, well, I say it's for the birds, but I mean, I agree with Anne here, although I feed the birds because I live in Cornwall, but I'm not even sure they particularly want this one.
No, absolutely. And probably far more serious is the potential split inside the Labour Party over Israel-Hamas.
I couldn't agree with you more, but totally. I mean, the fact is that getting on for half the parliamentary Labour Party is, at very least, uncomfortable with Keir Starmer's stance on the conflict in the Middle East. He stood foursquare behind but the same line as the Prime Minister, which is refusing to call for a ceasefire. But what I think the calculation is on the part of Hamas, that as the death toll in Gaza rises, opinion within the West will be split. And we're seeing early signs of it here in the Labour Party. And it's worth reminding ourselves that Keir Starmer went to huge trouble to eliminate anti-Semitism within his party, and remember that that's the reason why he had his predecessor Jeremy Corbyn chucked out. I think it's important, though, to make the distinction between anti-Semitism and those and the view of so many who fear that there will be hideous and monumental rises in the numbers of civilian casualties brought about by this conflict.
Absolutely. Who knew? They say, a week is a long time in politics. Just shows that anything could happen in the next year. Peter, thank you very much indeed. Great to talk to you. Right, do stick with us at 6:26. We've got lots more to talk about, including, of course, all the sport. And we'll also be looking across the pond at what's happening with Donald Trump.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best.
Bellissima.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
It's 6:28. Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Anne and Martin.
Now, Donald Trump has told some of the biggest Jewish donors that his support for Israel is unwavering.
Well, he was speaking at the Republican Jewish Convention earlier, and the former US president said America will not be apologizing for standing alongside Israel.
We will fully support the Israelis in their mission to ensure that Hamas is decimated and these atrocities will be avenged. They will be avenged. In many ways, they'll be avenged. I think even beyond what you're thinking about. For 4 straight years, I kept America safe, I kept Israel safe, and I kept the world safe. The world was a safer place, a much safer place. Today, the world is blowing up all around, no matter where you look. If I were president, the attack on Israel would never, ever have happened.
Well, joining us now, former Nevada Republican Party Chair, Amy Tarkanian. Good morning. And what is your thought? Do you agree with what he said? If he'd been president, the world would not be falling apart as it appears to be.
Well, I think in a nutshell, his entire speech, first of all, he was able to stick to his teleprompter for the most part. So he was able to keep his composure without actually attacking any of the other opponents during that event. But, pretty much everything that's bad in the world, he claims would not have happened if he were president. And everything that's good that's happening in the world is somewhat good, maybe not great, but it would be even better if he were president. And that's pretty much in a nutshell of what his speech entails. It's a bunch of, coulda, woulda, shouldas, assumptions, and there's no telling if we would still be in the predicaments that we are worldwide and here domestically if he were president.
But Amy, it's fair to say it was a all-you-can-eat buffet of populism in Las Vegas that he dished out, and he gave some firm indications of where he would like to go. For starters, one of the first things we will do when we get in the White House is to stop the invasion that's taking place on our southern borders, revoke everything that Biden brought in. He said he's going to kick out critical race theory from schools. He will ban this attack on gasoline-powered engines. He will get critical race theory and gender ideology out of schools. He also called Biden totally incoherent. Here's a guy really rolling with the punches and giving that base of his exactly what they want to hear.
Sure. And actually, you know, when he was president, he said he was going to drain the swamp, and he did none of that. And so, you know, he has a laundry list of items that sound fantastic that he would like to tackle. We all wanted to see him tackle even just a small portion of that while he was in the White House, and it just didn't happen. And so if he were to become the president once again and start to tackle that laundry list of items, that would be fantastic. But he's going to have to also be successful by assisting those who are running for House of Representatives, for the U.S. Senate, in order to get all of these things accomplished. And in this last election, the majority of those that he endorsed, they failed. They did not win. And so we're now dealing with, you know, a speakership position that took over 20 days to actually get a speaker in place. And the Republicans have a slim majority, and we still can't get our act together. So, you know, his list is wonderful. It sounds promising, but is it attainable? Is it doable? I think it's more so, like you just mentioned, it's red meat for the base.
It's fair to say it's landing with the voters. In many states now, Trump is leading Joe Biden.
I'm sorry, say that again?
In many states, Trump is now leading the polls against Biden, and he's streets ahead as the Republican nominee. No one's even near him.
Sorry, Amy, you're having trouble hearing us. Oh, I think we'll have to leave it there. Amy, thank you so much. I don't know if you can hear, but I hope maybe your sound engineers pass on the fact that we do appreciate you joining us this morning. Very, very interesting.
Just getting warmed up there.
Well, I know you were. I just wonder, I mean, if Donald Trump does end up as the Republican candidate, he's got to choose a new running mate, hasn't he? And who will that be?
Well, I wonder if all of this...
Can't be Mike Pence again.
Well, I wonder if all of this is that particular show. You know, who's going to be the VP? Because at the moment, there's nobody...
And that's a very important with everybody now, isn't it? Because the VP, because both candidates, if it ends up being a Biden-Trump race, both candidates are old. Although I have to say that Trump looks in better form.
He does, and he did a great impression of Biden walking off the stage last night. He's now becoming part of his comedy routine. And if Ron DeSantis, who's the more moderate candidate, we'll talk about this in the next hour, were to be the VP, the vice president, I mean, that could be a team really to reckon with. All to play for. It's going to be one heck of a circus to watch.
And talking of all to play for, yes, there's a lot of sport around at the moment and quite a lot of interesting results. Aidan's here. Hi, Aidan.
Good morning to you both. Good to see you.
Good morning. Right, what shall we start with?
I think the Rugby World Cup, the international event like that, South Africa winning their 4th tournament and showing that they are the eminent force in World Cups. Don't forget, Anne, they didn't compete in the first 2 back in 87 and 91 because they were ostracised as a result of their participation in apartheid and associated acts in politics. But yesterday, they did it the hard way because, well, in the quarter-final, they won it by 1 point against France. Against England in the semi-final, they won the match by 1 point last night. By 1 point. They were helped, though, in the first half when Sam Cane, the New Zealand captain, was sent off for a high tackle. He said after the game he's going to have to live with that for the rest of his life. He's feeling a real sense of culpability. But it was another epic final in Paris. Now, we've criticised it many times, Anne, haven't we, how long this tournament has taken, the gaps between matches. But we have to say that the quarter-finals, the semi-finals, the final, they produced some absolutely epic rugby. And the tournament's going to be expanded from 20 to 24 teams next time, which I think will dilute the...
It'll take even longer.
Well, it will. It will. But if they can just narrow down the time a little bit, maybe sort out the scheduling, it might be better. England come away from it finishing 3rd. They obviously won their 3rd and 4th place playoff against Argentina on Friday. So a good tournament overall, just a bit stretched out. South Africa, it now means that of the last 5 tournaments, they've all been shared by New Zealand and South Africa, all Southern Hemisphere sides. Brian O'Driscoll, the Irish legend, said last night on television that some of those Northern Hemisphere sides, Ireland, Wales, Scotland, England not so much. They've been to 4 World Cup finals, but they're just not World Cup teams at the moment.
OK, moving on to the boxing, and cover your ears if you're just waking up and you haven't heard about the Tyson-Fury fight, but almost a huge upset. And, in fact, people saying that Tyson was very, very lucky to get this split decision.
Yeah, and can you explain first, for people like me who don't totally understand boxing, why the whole fight was controversial for a start?
Well, it's a crossover event, so what we're seeing is UFC or MMA fighters, mixed martial arts as we call it. They're making things a little bit interesting, spicing things up by fighting boxers, or they're fighting each other from each other's discipline. It always seems to be on boxing's terms, though, because that's the biggest of the sport. It's almost the same as what we call a catchweight, so we might find somebody who's traditionally a welterweight going up against a light heavyweight, and they're meeting in the middle. It can be dangerous at times, Anne, but that wasn't the case last night. That wasn't an issue of danger. I do think, though, that Tyson Fury lost that fight. I honestly do.
So Tyson Fury is a proper professional boxer.
Yeah, world heavyweight champ.
Yeah, a champ. And the other guy is...
He's an MMA fighter.
He's MMA.
Yeah.
So
sorry, he's UFC.
But he's not what you'd call a proper boxer.
He's never competed.
He's not a proper boxer at all. It's a completely separate discipline.
In a boxing ring.
So this, as we were saying yesterday, was an event just to draw the crowd and be sort of spectacular.
And it was meant to be a walk in the park for Tyson.
It was, but
that didn't happen.
But it was sanctioned as a professional fight, but there was no title on the line for Fury, so there was no jeopardy in that point of view, from that perspective. But he was out of shape, clearly. But you know what? He was knocked down in the 3rd round. I was listening to commentators talk about it last night, or comment on the fight, and they could not believe what was happening before their eyes, because, you know, I never believed that the judges would ever score it in Ngannou's favour. One of them did, but to get a split decision in his favour was going to be extremely unlikely, because it undermines the credibility of boxing. That's what was really going on here, Anne, I believe.
And that's serious, really, for the world of boxing.
Well, it is. I mean, I would absolutely. I would argue that
he was robbed.
I would argue that he was robbed, but I'd also argue that Tyson Fury avoided possibly the greatest upset in sporting history, not just boxing history, not just for the weights, for the classification. I can't think of a bigger upset in sport if Ngannou had won that, having not stepped in a professional ring.
And if that had happened, how damaging would that have been to the entire sport of boxing?
Hugely, because they've had a wretched 18 months. I've touched on it many times on this programme. They've had drug scandals. They've had issues where the fights that people want to see just aren't happening because of politics, because of jurisdictions, because of, you know... They want to fight in certain areas because the purses are bigger and they get paid more money. So they've been beset by problems with that. And there's complacency as well. And that's why we've seen YouTubers gain traction. They filled that void. Given that he was 30-1 on to win last night, Fury, if he'd lost that fight, it would have been chaos within boxing. I'm not sure where the sport really would have gone from there, because it would have been really in disarray.
And lots of bookies out of business. Aidan McGee, thank you very much.
We'll do all the football later on as well, some big stories in that.
Yeah, some big stories in the football, yeah, absolutely. Right now, yesterday we were talking about Boris Johnson coming to work at GB News. Well, coming up, we're going to talk about John Cleese. Yeah. He's set to make his GB News debut tonight at 9 p.m, so you're watching the right channel. This is GB News.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello again, it's 6:41, and if you've just joined us, a reminder of our top stories this morning. In very shocking news overnight, the Friends star Matthew Perry has died, aged just 54. The US actor, best known for his iconic role as Chandler Bing, was found dead at his home. We'll pay tribute to him throughout the programme.
And in Israel, the second stage of the war with Hamas has begun. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel's ground invasion of Gaza will signify a long and difficult war.
Labour are at the centre of a possible nepotism row as the Partygate investigator Sue Gray's son becomes a candidate at the next election, and that's a Labour candidate. That's as divisions continue to grow over the party's stance on the conflict in the Middle East.
And let's bring it up to date now with the front pages. First of all, the Times. Sunday Times leads with Netanyahu vowing to destroy Hamas and rescue hostages.
And the Sunday Telegraph reports on Israel sending in what they call elite troops for Netanyahu's second stage.
The Observer leads with Netanyahu also declaring a second war of independence.
Meanwhile, the Mail on Sunday leads with the leader of an extremist Islamic group living a second life as an NHS GP.
And the Daily Star reports that psychic Sally held a séance at 39,000 feet. You've got to have your teeth in to say that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still wonder why we do it. But anyway, joining us to go through today's headlines, radio and television broadcaster legend in his own lunchtime, David Hamilton, and writer and journalist Emma Wolfe. I mean, it sounds so silly to call you, a DJ and all the rest of it.
Can I say, first of all,
David Hamilton.
Can I just say, first of all, congratulations on your OBE this week.
My dear. Thank you.
And may I say, well deserved. All the wonderful work you did for charity, and particularly cot deaths, and your glittering and long-lasting career in broadcasting.
Oh, what an homage. Can I tape record that little bit?
Yes, you can. And I gather that there are lots of people at Buck House who are watching GB News.
Well, actually, yes. I mean, that's what was so lovely.
That's what you said yesterday.
As I was going through, I wasn't just recognised by the occasional other, VIP guest or whatever you might expect. It was the people in the palace who said, oh, yes, hello,
yeah.
And then afterwards I went on to dinner in the... Sorry, not dinner, it was tea in the House of Lords. And the same thing happened there. So people watch GB News. Yeah. They really do. It's not just what we say. Anyway.
They're lovers of free speech.
Well, I think so. And something new and a bit different.
And
Tell you what...
And true patriots.
And what is a bit different is one of the things that we're going to have on the show tonight at 9 p.m. is John Cleese.
Yes, this has been long awaited, hasn't it? Because the trailers have been running for yonks.
Yeah.
But he's here at last. Actually, I thought maybe this was about me when I was... The Dinosaur Hour.
Well, I'm sure you'll be on it, David.
Well, I don't know. Is this part of his alimony tour?
No, it's a separate thing. It's out tonight, 9 o'clock, and I think we've got a trailer we can show you now about what's going to be on it.
It's really good.
Hello, and welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. Now, this is a new show aimed at an enormous demographic, the out of touch. But the out of touch who have chosen to stay out of touch, and the out of touch who don't even know that they are. So, if you're looking for photographs of reality stars' breakfasts, or details of the latest trans person's bicycle accident, or for a fun story about an old woman who hasn't sneezed for 70 years, this is not the show for you. It's just a lot of very doddering old fools making it up as we go along. However, the good news is there'll be lots of cats.
Do you know, I think that looks really good.
It looks great.
You?
Don't you think?
I think that's going to work.
It looks really good fun, you know.
And I'm not even a fan of John Cleese.
No, well, I'm not usually, actually, but I think he'll be good at that.
Yeah.
It's a bit like the success of that magazine, The Oldie.
Yeah.
Yes.
There is actually a market there of people who just want sort of very, very grown-up things to talk about.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm all for that.
Yeah.
It's wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah.
And all that, and Boris Johnson signed up as well.
I know.
Star striker.
Quite a bit, but I think you're absolutely right. There's a huge market for older people of a certain vintage, and I think the mainstream channels forget that at their peril.
Yes,
They're always
they do.
chasing the youth, who anyway are always on YouTube.
They're not actually watching
No, they're
television in
no,
that way.
they're
They
not,
may
are
not
they?
be sitting down at, Sunday evening, 9 o'clock, you've had your dinner. Perfect. That's kind of what you want to watch, and that's exactly what young people that they are chasing, desperately, are not doing.
Well, just to remind you, it's 9 o'clock tonight, and I'll certainly be watching it. I shall have to go and have a nap in the afternoon and then get up to watch it. Meanwhile, the very, very sad news, I'm afraid, that's happened overnight, Emma, is Matthew Perry's passing. And it happened too late to actually catch the front pages of our newspapers, but it's going to be felt all over the world because he was globally known.
He really was, and let's be honest, for Friends, Friends, which ran from 1994 to 2004, but I don't think has been off our screens ever since.
Well, that's right, yeah.
You literally cannot watch some of the, the smaller channels without reruns and reruns and reruns. And it's kind of all I know Matthew Perry for Chandler, but what a role and what a you got a sense of the man as well as a really kind of troubled but quite warm and quite a sort of person you think actually would be lovely to go and have a drink with. He had talked a lot about sort of substance abuse and drug and alcohol issues. And what, very, very early
Well, you
death.
judge a person, I think, by their friends, don't you? And whenever any of the other friends are interviewed about anything, they're always very, very warm towards each other, aren't they?
Yeah, they
and
are.
particularly always pay tribute to, particularly Matthew Perry, who is apparently a great comic actor. His timing was perfect.
He's died very young, and it appears that he's drowned.
Yes.
That's right.
In his own jacuzzi.
Yeah.
And it's been getting the viewers coming in as well. Tony in Suffolk has emailed in already saying, R.I.P. to a troubled soul. I also enjoyed his part in the West Wing TV series. See, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, he was in the whole 9 yards and then the whole 10 yards with Bruce Willis. Rob says, morning, Rob, I used to look forward to every Friday night with my mum. We would get a takeaway and lots of sweets, and we would watch the latest Friends episode. They were good times.
I think that's part of its appeal, isn't it? Is that it was
It was an
cross-generational,
event.
and it was on
Yeah.
for so long, 10 years.
Yeah.
It became a part of people's lives. They grew up with it, and that's why they have that connection.
Teenagers loved it, mums and dads loved it. Yeah, it really did go across the generations. And I think the point about him being open that I was just making there about his alcohol and substance abuse is that he's not one of those people that pretends to be holier than thou. Pretends to be holier than thou. I think he was very open about, being a bit of a mess at times and trying again and trying again. And his recent memoir details that.
We all hoped, I think, when I read excerpts from his memoir, and I think we all hoped that he had finally beaten it, but maybe you never do if you're that badly affected. I don't know.
What's the story you told about him watching Julia Roberts?
He went out with Julia Roberts for a long time, and they were seen as very much an item. And then, clearly, his addictions got in the way, and their relationship ended. And he says in his memoir that when she got her first Oscar, he watched her on the television going up and getting the Oscar, and he was writhing on the floor in agony at a rehab. And that's where he felt, he'd lost
rock
everything.
bottom. Yeah.
He'd hit rock bottom, and she was getting her Oscar. And it's very, very. I mean, his memoir is very well worth reading. It really is.
The funny thing is, in all his photographs, he looks so well.
Yeah.
He looks great,
Yeah. He had that sort of classic American, sort of, Ivy League handsomeness. He was gorgeous.
Yes, he was. OK, we'll move on, I'm afraid, to the other news stories of the time and how could you avoid it. In The Telegraph, David, you've been looking at Israel now sending in their elite troops.
Yes, this is the front page of The Telegraph today. Israel last night said that its best soldiers were fighting Hamas inside the Gaza Strip as Benjamin Netanyahu, easy for me to say, declared that the second stage of a long war against the terror group had begun. Israel's forces fought fierce street fighting against Hamas in northern Gaza using tanks and infantry yesterday, with the chief of the General Staff of the Israeli Defense Forces saying his troops had killed hundreds of terrorists. He said this is a war with multiple stages The objectives of this are to require a ground operation. The best soldiers are now operating in Gaza. So it looks as though we're going to have another long war.
Yeah, certainly are.
You know, war is breaking out all over the world, isn't it? It's a very worrying time.
Very sad times at the moment.
Yeah, very, very dark times. He's very clear, Netanyahu talks about dismantling Hamas and bringing the hostages home.
And
we've been braced all week, really, for this invasion, this incursion. Well, they're not calling it an invasion, but for the troops to go in, and it seems to be, with photographs and coverage coming out of Gaza now, it does seem to be there's actual street fighting and very, very...
And let's bring that now to British streets. Your next story, Sunday Express front page about yesterday's pro-Palestinian march in London. 100,000 turnout. We understand 9 arrests, some of which are being treated for hate crimes. And what's the take Sunday Express have on this?
Yeah, Sunday Express is saying that there's real concern now. I mean, their headline is Ban Jihadi Hate Mob. There's real concern that these extremist groups are stirring up hatred, are using predominantly peaceful pro-Palestinian marches, protests, rallies, whatever we call them, to glorify terrorism, to call for jihad, however you interpret that, shouting Allahu Akbar outside Downing Street, that kind of thing, and that the police are not being, that the police and the Prime Minister, the government, are not being determined and sort of...
Well, they're being very standoffish, they're being very soft-soapy. It looks like two-tier policing.
Yeah, it does. It does. On the front of the Telegraph, I think it is, there's talks of a crackdown on extremism. So Michael Gove and Suella Braverman are looking at changing the definition. If you could think of anything less I don't know, proactive. They're going to change the definition, possibly, of extremism to include a slightly broader definition. Wow, what action? You've got hundreds of thousands of people, as you say, across the UK. This is the 3rd weekend running. It's got more and more fraught, febrile every weekend.
Well, there are even talks of Iranian spies being amongst the mob, deliberately trying to whip things up.
There's a fine line, isn't there, between free speech and inciting violence, and that's the problem that the police have, and it's very difficult to...
Yeah, and I think it's not hard to see where the pockets of violence and... I mean, me and my little one were cycling through Waterloo yesterday. It was really quite frightening. But you could see that a lot of it was very peaceful, and then there were bits that were very, very tense and very... it shouldn't be hard for the police to tell.
And also, looking ahead, if these protests continue, in 2 weeks' time on Saturday, it's Remembrance.
Yes, of course.
Oh, Lord, yes,
and
it is.
the cenotaph has been targeted. In fact, yesterday there were arrests at the cenotaph for people protecting, as we discussed yesterday on Breakfast, British patriots turned up to defend that monument, that sacred monument, and there were flashpoints and arrests. A guy lifting an Israeli flag was dragged away by the police. An Israeli flag. Now, I'm just saying, if that continues on Remembrance weekend...
All right, well, the police must be thinking, how on earth are we going to police Remembrance Day? Because the capital particularly, but everywhere in the country, is going to be full of veterans, it's going to be full of people marching with medals.
It shouldn't be hard for the police to protect our monuments, such as the cenotaph and other statues. They've been scaling, which is not safe. Whatever you think politically, that is not safe. It's a public order offence.
Right. It's funny, isn't it, how people say, will a war in the Middle East affect us? This is the absolute proof of how it does.
Absolutely.
And one hopes it won't get worse, but don't we need the police to be tough rather than second-guessing their own decisions?
Yeah, but you would argue, I think, with some justification, if you're not arresting people for shouting jihad, 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 what do you arrest?
But they had their convoluted explanation about how they had specialist officers interpreting the sense of the word jihad, and that in that sense it didn't mean holy war, it meant something else.
Struggle.
As if the Met Police have that kind of knowledge.
I think there are other words that have been used as well, which are stronger.
Of course there are. And it's a very, very frightening situation for anyone, but especially for Jews in this country now.
Shall we quickly finish on a lighter note, because Nigel Farage doesn't like being out of the limelight. Boris Johnson, of course, signed this week. GB News fellow presenter. Nigel, what's happening?
Here's a GB newsman who seems to be getting away, because Nigel Farage has signed up for a reported £1 million to do I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here.
Wow.
And the newspaper, I think it's the Sunday... is it the Sunday Sun?
Yeah.
Yeah, it has a picture of him with a lovely caption here, and it says, I never thought I would say these words, but vote Remain. He wants to stay in.
He wants to stay in, of course he does. My goodness, he's going for a lot.
I can't believe he's doing that, but that is a lot of money. Quite tempting.
Yes.
But I also think he'd be really good at it because you'd see that. You met him the other week, didn't you?
Yeah.
And you were quite disarmed by it.
But without it, where will he put his money without his bank account?
It doesn't matter what you think of his politics. Nigel's a lovely man and he's an entertainer. Boy, is he an entertainer. And he will be brilliant in there. But I dread to think what sort of arguments they might get into around the campfire.
But it'd be a great box office.
Well, yes, it will.
He's very disarming, and he is a man of the people. So, he'll probably win it.
He probably will win it. For the moment, we'll leave it there. If you don't mind, we need to catch up with the weather, find out exactly what's happening for you. Here's Rachel Ayres.
Good morning, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So the first half of the weekend was fairly unsettled, but what will Sunday bring? Well, last night's rain is now across northern England and Scotland, bringing some fairly heavy and persistent rain here for much of the day. Elsewhere, it's a mixture of sunshine and showers, and these will be most frequent and heaviest across southern and western coasts. It's the central slice of the UK that's going to see the driest and brightest weather and feeling pretty pleasant in any sunny spells here, away from the strong winds across the north and south coast. So as we go through tonight, that rain is going to continue across eastern parts of Scotland. Showers continuing elsewhere as well, but still a few clear spells, especially in the east. And this is where we're going to see some of the lowest temperatures as we go through tonight and to the start of the new working week, but still not expecting a frost around for Monday morning. So through Monday then, it's another day of sunshine and showers for many though. We will start to see those showers easing a little though along the south coast as we go through the day. Rain continuing still though across eastern parts of Scotland. They're becoming slightly more patchy in nature, and those winds now coming from the north across Scotland, so feeling slightly cooler here, still clinging on to something slightly warmer across the south though.
Thanks very much indeed. Well, do stick with us. You're watching Breakfast here on GB News, and we'll be keeping you up to date with everything that's happening, obviously, in the Middle East at the moment, all the latest from our reporter there. And also, sadly, bringing you up to date with the very latest from the United States, where we've heard overnight of the death of Matthew Perry, the star of Friends. So
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good morning, it's 7 o'clock on Sunday the 29th of October. Today, in shock news overnight, Friends star Matthew Perry has died, aged just 54. The US-Canadian actor, best known for his iconic role as Chandler Bing, was found dead at his home. and tributes are pouring in.
And now to Israel. The second stage of the invasion has begun. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel's ground invasion of Gaza will signify a long and difficult war. Mark White will bring us up to date from Tel Aviv.
Well, the Israeli Defense Forces have just confirmed that they carried out 450 strikes on Hamas positions in Gaza overnight.
And back home, 100,000 people turned out in London to protest Israel's bombing of Gaza, calling for a ceasefire on humanitarian grounds. 9 people were arrested, with some incidents being treated as suspected hate crimes.
And Labour are at the centre of a nepotism row as the Partygate investigator Sue Gray's son joins the running to become a candidate for the Labour Party at the next general election. And that's as divisions continue to grow over the Labour Party's stance on the conflict in the Middle East.
And this is interesting, with hotel prices reaching levels of £100 a night everywhere you look. We'll speak to our travel expert, Simon Calder, to work out how to find out the best deals.
And Rachel Ayres will have your weather forecast.
Persistent rain across Scotland today and sunshine and showers elsewhere with some blustery winds. Join me later for a full forecast with all the details.
And Aidan's here with all your sport.
Yes, good morning. The father of Liverpool star Luis Diaz is still missing after a suspected kidnap plot in Colombia. And we look ahead to this afternoon's Manchester derby at Old Trafford.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm Anne Diamond.
And I'm Martin Daubney, and this is Breakfast on GB News.
Thank you so much. Lots of views coming in already. On the Sue Gray thing, I was just sort of trying to just be totally objective, because everybody has always said that Sue Gray is a person of absolute integrity.
Yep.
That's why she was in charge of the Partygate investigation. And then, of course, off she went to become Keir Starmer's chief of staff.
Yeah.
And now we hear that it's her son who's going to possibly be a candidate for a Labour seat in the upcoming general election.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't necessarily nepotism, is it? I don't think it is. He's always been a Labour activist.
That's right.
And why shouldn't he be? He's not on the apron strings of his mum. I'm just standing up for her a bit there, but I don't know. Ben in Cardiff says, how on earth is this allowed? Mother and son operation in Labour?
And Angela says, it's great to hear different views on Sue Gray's son. This is what GB News is all about.
Yes, that's right. We did have a little argument earlier.
It's good.
Joe says, what's next? Sue Gray's granddaughter joins Labour's pioneer group.
And Nada says, I think Martin's point is valid, that if the Tories did the same, then the Labour Party would be screaming nepotism too, regardless of whether or not it is true.
Exactly, and I think that's the point, regardless of whether it's true. But no doubt we'll be finding out more. However, overshadowing a lot of things, I think, today, obviously we know that the terrible conflict is going on in Israel, and we'll be live from Tel Aviv very shortly. But I think there was very shocking news overnight for a lot of us who will feel it. We'll feel it as though it happened to a friend. Because the American-Canadian actor, comedian and producer Matthew Perry, best known, of course, for his role on the US sitcom Friends, has died. Reports suggest he actually drowned at his home.
Yeah, he was just 54 years old, and it was at the actor's home in Los Angeles after LA police received a call around 4 p.m. local time yesterday.
Well, all the sources we've heard from say there is apparently no foul play and no confirmed cause of death, and now an investigation is, of course, ongoing.
Well, joining us now live from Los Angeles is showbiz expert Kinsey Schofield. Kinsey, a very, very sad moment for lots of people waking up in Britain who grew up with Friends. It's 10 years from 1994 to 2004. What's the latest information on the actual cause of death and the circumstances surrounding it before we go on to look back over his fantastic career?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Martin. What we do know is that he played pickleball for 2 hours on Saturday morning, that he had asked his assistant to go run some errands. The assistant says that they were gone for about 2 hours, and then when they returned, they found Matthew unconscious in his jacuzzi. Now, there was a 911 phone call made where a cardiac arrest incident was mentioned over the phone. We don't know if that's in any way, shape, or form associated. But the words cardiac arrest are utilized when it comes to that initial call. We believe that he drowned in his jacuzzi, and TMZ is reporting that there were no drugs found at the scene. This is a man, and aside from the 2 hours of pickleball, this is a man who we have seen working on his body and challenging his body over the last few weeks. One of the last paparazzi photos taken of Matthew was on October 3rd as he exited a gym. So I know that there is speculation in regards to his past, and could some of those demons have come back to haunt him when it comes to addiction? But he, over the last year or so, I'd say 2 years now, was very proud of his sobriety, promoted his sobriety, and was focused on being better physically and mentally.
We know, of course, don't we, that his professional friends, as it were real friends in real life, and they will be devastated, as will the whole of Hollywood. In fact, his reach was all over the world, wasn't it?
Well, I mean, Anne, did you know that he went to school with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau? I had no idea. Justin Trudeau actually tweeted, "Matthew Perry's passing is shocking and saddening. I'll never forget the schoolyard games we used to play, and I know people around the world are never going to forget the joy he brought to them. Thanks for all the laughs, Matthew. You were loved, and you will be missed." Matthew's mother was actually the press secretary for Justin's father in Canada. Isn't that, wonderful? And Justin's stepfather is a very well-respected journalist here in the States. And he said a few months ago to People magazine, just talking about his stepson, Matthew Perry, he called him remarkable and said, "We love having him around," and described him as intense, talented, and a focused character. So I think you're absolutely right. People are devastated all over the world.
And that was the unique talent, I suppose, of the writers of Friends. Kinsey, thank you so much. It's great to see you today, albeit on a very sad occasion. However, joining us now is somebody who understands why Friends was so huge. Executive producer and comedy scriptwriter Dan Warren happens to be one of our GB News team. Hi there. Why was Friends so amazingly successful?
I think it's universal appeal. There are certain comedies now that can be seen as possibly too dark or too alternative, where Friends just went for the simple fact that they were just friends. That was the very simple essence of it, and that's what makes comedy successful, is the less is more. If something is just a very simple premise, basically, as Matt LeBlanc said, it's that time where you leave your parents and before you set up a family of your own, it's when your friends are your family.
Yeah.
And essentially we can all relate to those times.
Precisely, that's the word I was going to use. Relatable, but also extremely rigorously written and produced. It was methodically put together by some of the best writers on the planet at that time.
Absolutely. I mean, when the pilot was first touted around the Hollywood studios, every actor wanted to be part of it. And Matthew Perry basically read the part of Chandler and was desperate to do it, but was signed to a sitcom based on baggage handlers at LA Airport in 2004 or something.
So they had to fight for him to be part of Friends?
Yeah, basically, he was desperate, but was Fox who commissioned this weird sitcom, basically like, no, absolutely, you're contracted, you must stick with us. And then after the execs watched this pilot, they said, this is rubbish, you're released. And he just knew he was destined for Chandler. And when he went for the audition, he didn't even need the script because he'd rehearsed it so much, he just channeled that character straight away.
Wow. And what makes the show so endearing as well is that natural chemistry they have. I mean, if you see some of the outtakes, some of the bloopers, they're in hysterics, and the live audience was such a key part. It generated that feeling of spontaneity, but genuine, in-the-moment humour.
Yeah, exactly. And you talk about chemistry. The execs were so keen to get that right that when they were all cast, they basically got a private jet, flew them to Vegas, and basically they had the six of them had this team bonding exercise, basically, and they said once you've done this weekend, your life will change forever.
And I suppose, incredibly, it went on for 10 years, 10 seasons, and they remained friends right through. Even when Matthew Perry actually talks about, he doesn't even remember filming 3 of those seasons because he was so high.
Exactly. He says, like, the last season he believed was the most successful because that's when he sort of tried to, he thought he'd sort of beaten his demons, so to speak. And you're interested when you say 10 years because there are some certain sitcoms which you think they could have ended it much sooner. They've really just milked it. Where Friends, people still wanted it to carry on, but they were like, no. And as a collective, when they first started, they were all on different salaries, but they all ended up on the same salary.
That's right, I remember hearing about that. Yes, they decided to all join together
Yeah.
and have exactly the same salary each.
Exactly, because there's always a debate when Friends is discussed from a comedy point of view of who is the protagonist, and actually they all are. It's probably the most equal sitcom that's ever been created, because in different episodes, different ones, take that main lead, and that's what has made it interesting.
It's interesting that people.
I was going to say, those of us who know it really well, now, how many? I watch it every time it ever comes on. I could almost tell you the next line. Who were the 3 producers?
Oh, Kaufman.
Right?
Yes.
Kaufman, Crane.
Yes.
Yeah. Why do I know that? Because
Well,
it came up all the time.
you're
And
obsessed.
also on the reunion programme, they talked a lot about how they chose and cast those 6 people because it mattered so much to get it right.
Yeah, because there's so many sitcoms that could have been much better, but the casting initially was so wrong, and they got it spot on, and it just proved it was the right mix, because obviously there was the Friends spin-off Joey, which just plummeted
Didn't work.
because it's that chemistry.
Didn't have the 6 of them.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great to talk to you, Dan. I'll tell you what, before we move on, shall we have a look at him in action at his best?
This guy was me, and it was me who would learn that it was me who was the best you'd ever had. I'd be going like this.
That's lovely. Matthew Perry there as Chandler Bing in Friends, and sadly overnight we heard of his death, very early death, at the age of 54.
OK, now.
We'll move on. It's 12 minutes past 7. You're watching Breakfast on GB News. Now, breaking
with
oh, yeah,
historical
no, well,
norms.
you take over,
I'll do it,
absolutely.
shall I? OK, now, breaking with historical norms, the International Committee of the Red Cross has called for a humanitarian pause in the fighting in Gaza.
Yeah, and that's as the Israeli Prime Minister says. We are now entering the second phase of the war, as the Israeli Defence Forces claim to have struck more than 450 targets in Gaza overnight.
But in a relief to many, some phone lines and internet connections have now returned to Gaza after Israel had cut them off.
Well, let's talk now to our security editor, Mark White, in Tel Aviv. Mark, do bring us up to date with what the very latest news is.
Well, the Israeli Defence Forces just saying now that overnight fast jets carried out 450 attacks on Hamas positions, mainly in northern Gaza. They've also confirmed that an IDF officer was severely injured after being struck by a mortar shell in northern Gaza, and elsewhere an IDF soldier was moderately injured when he was struck by Hamas terrorists also in northern Gaza. They've both been airlifted to hospital. This is, according to Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, last night, who held a news conference alongside 2 senior members of his war cabinet, the second phase that we are in now, with Israeli troops on the ground in some parts of northern Gaza. And I think that's probably what we're going to see going forward, not necessarily that big tens of thousands of Israeli soldiers pouring over the border fence into Gaza, as many had expected, but these increased tempo of operations on the ground and in the air, just incrementally trying to take Hamas positions, take out their anti-tank missile launchers, the other booby traps that they're setting up, and all of the while trying to push forward, trying to gain intelligence on where these hostages are being held. One thing that the Israeli Prime Minister did yesterday before holding that news conference was to hold a meeting with families of some of the at least 229 hostages still being held by Hamas. They wanted assurances that these hostages would be the first priority. Well, Benjamin Netanyahu says that actually destroying Hamas is the first priority, but absolutely the safety of the hostages is uppermost in the minds of every Israeli serviceman who is pushing into Gaza.
And Mark, how significant is the intervention of the International Committee of the Red Cross following on from the United Nations in asking for this ceasefire? I mean, they never get involved in wars, do they, ordinarily?
Well, rarely, but it's not a ceasefire as such that they're calling for. They're calling for a de-escalation in the conflict at the moment, a subtle difference, but just to allow those people to flee areas further south, although they're saying, you know, really in the Gaza Strip there is nowhere for people to go. I should add as well as, you know, saying that there should be a de-escalation in the conflict, they are also criticising Hamas for its use of its citizens as human shields and for holding on to these hostages who the International Red Cross say should be released immediately.
Mark, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. That's Mark White there in Tel Aviv, and we'll join him later on as well. Back home to domestic politics, and the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, is under pressure once again as his Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, remember her? Well, she's found herself at the centre of what could even be a nepotism row.
Yeah, it was revealed that her son has now applied to run as the Labour candidate in the seat of Beckenham and Penge in South East London. Sue Gray, of course, is known for being the controversial former civil service tasked with writing the Partygate report.
Now, that's all happening, but as well as that, Starmer's party is growing increasingly rebellious over Labour's official stance on the Israel-Hamas conflict. For instance, senior Labour figures in the shadow cabinet and the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, and Manchester Mayor, Andy Burnham, and Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar, well, they've all called for an immediate ceasefire.
Well, joining us now is the political commentator Peter Spencer. Hello to you again, Peter. Always a pleasure. Let's start with the nepotism row, which turned into a bit of a row between Anne and myself earlier. Sue Gray's son been selected, he's on the candidate list to be selected in Penge in South East London. Of course, the Conservatives are crying nepotism. Is there anything in the story, or is it a load of hot air?
Well, look, let me say at the outset, you've been talking about friends. I do hope you children are going to stop squabbling about this, because otherwise Mum is going to have to smack, and we don't want that, do we? Now, when it comes to nepotism, yeah, I mean, look, it happens in politics, it happens in business, it happens in our own business, for heaven's sake. But you're recruiting someone and you say, look, does anybody know this guy? Is he, she okay? And, you know, I mean, the point was made actually during the COVID crisis, how there was a kind of a fast track for getting specialized equipment. People were obviously in a desperate hurry, but they were casting around saying, does anybody know anybody who can actually supply this stuff? I mean, this is kind of how life works. When it comes to the amount of trouble for the Labour Party over this, I'd say it's relatively limited and relatively ephemeral. Of course, the Labour Party's enemies in the Tory Party and in Fleet Street are going to make mischief over this. But I mean, I write a regular political column for a magazine. Is this story going to feature in it in a couple of days? Answer no.
More important, I guess, are the divisions that are beginning to appear. It's cracks, actually, beginning to appear in the Labour front line over what's happening in Israel and where Labour stands on that. Now, Keir Starmer has said that they stand by Israel's right to defend themselves. But other members of the Labour Party are being much more strident. What do you think is going to happen?
I think there's a lot of trouble brewing there for Keir Starmer, I have to say. I think it's the biggest challenge to his authority that he's endured since he became leader of the party. He went to a tremendous amount of trouble to purge the party of anti-Semitism, but it's still a relatively raw subject, and now it's become completely inflamed at present. I mean, we're looking at something around half the Parliamentary Labour Party is not happy with his stance over this. And I have to make the point, it's not just the Parliamentary Labour Party, it's also the constituency base. There are millions of Muslims in UK, most of whom tend to vote Labour, and an awful lot of them are thinking, listen, whose side are you on? I mean, there's seething resentment within the Arab world about the very existence of the state of Israel, and for Keir Starmer to be showing so much solidarity for Israel in its response to the October the 7th atrocity sticks in an awful lot of craws and might cost the Labour Party an awful lot of votes.
We shall see. Peter Spencer, thank you very much indeed.
OK, moving on. A new survey from consumer group Which has found that it's now more difficult than ever to find a hotel room that costs less than 100 quid per night.
Yes, and I think if it's cheaper than 100 quid, you wonder what you're getting.
Indeed.
Well, the report says the average price paid at Mercure hotels was £106 per room per night, while booking a room overnight at Travelodge comes out at about £79.
So, are we facing a cost of travelling crisis? Well, there's only one man to ask about that, and that's our travel guru, Simon Calder, who's live from Rhodes. Rhodes, I was there last week. What's the weather like? It was fantastic last week.
Martin, it's even better. They're still talking about your visit here, by the way, but yeah, it's going to be a 30-degree scorcher today. Obviously, the clocks have gone back, so therefore, even from 7 o'clock this morning, it was bright sunshine here in the beautiful town of Lindos. And I can tell you exactly how to save money, and that's to come to Rhodes at this time of year. I paid 30 quid for my EasyJet flight over. Wow. I'm staying in a lovely room, double room, £45 for the night, and going back, I've got a reasonable deal, about 80 quid on my flight. So, yeah, not quite out of summer yet, but crucially, this survey is, well, it just tells us what we are finding out gradually, and that is the unfortunate fact that people are paying an awful lot more for hotels, typically 13% higher, £100. Yeah, if you're paying less than that, you can think you've got a fairly good deal. And in London, of course, it's even worse. But there are things you can do to keep the cost down. In particular, do not go through one of the big international booking sites. They take 15% out of every transaction, and so therefore, if you're paying £100 for your room and you're going through one of these big sites, then that means, well, 15 quid of your hard-earned money is going straight to that company rather than to the hotelier. They've mostly kind of got systems whereby if you sign up and register with their loyalty scheme, then you will get a better deal. So, yeah, there's plenty of value around. And, of course, you don't have to stay in a hotel. There's plenty of Airbnbs. Bed and breakfast. Anybody remember them? There's still lots of landladies and landlords delivering fantastic service. And then don't forget the good old youth hostel. They are still around. So it's a good time to be a traveller. But at the moment, some of those rates are annoyingly high. Just one more thing in London, if I may, always worth staying out in the suburbs and relying on the very good public transport, particularly the new Elizabeth line, to take you into town.
Great tip, Simon, and it does look lovely with you in the dappled light there of Rhodes. And, of course, I think we saw the family in the background. They probably don't know.
No, not my family.
Not your family.
Well, there might be a family in the background. No,
where?
There's all sorts of families here. I'm just going to let you see the site there. It's
I see. That's where you are.
Rose. I know, Lindos. OK.
Well, it was a family, as you say. I thought it might be your family, but we couldn't quite see. But that explains why there's a little buzz of noise behind. Anyway, it's great to see you, Simon, and enjoy the rest of your time in Rhodes. Looks lovely.
Superb. Now, coming up, should MPs be banned from using WhatsApp? We'll be debating that next.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
7:27, welcome back. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Anne and Martin.
Now, the former SNP Health Secretary Alex Neil has called for an urgent review over the use of WhatsApp.
Of course, this comes after the Prime Minister failed to hand over WhatsApp messages from his time as Chancellor, and he failed to hand them over to the COVID inquiry, which was asking for them, despite a High Court ruling that ministers should disclose communications for disclosure.
So the question today is, should MPs be banned from using WhatsApp? Well, joining us now is former Tory MP Neil Parish and former Labour MP in the studio, Simon Danzig. Let's start with you, Mr. Parish. What do you think? I mean, obviously, some of the Partygate revelations were hugely embarrassing for the government. The COVID files leaked, of course, to a journalist by Matt Hancock, or not leaked, given directly, hugely damaging for the government. So on the basis of that evidence, do you think MPs should be banned from using WhatsApp?
I don't know whether they should be banned, but I think they probably should stop using it if all of this is going to come out in the public domain. Because even if Labour was in power, I would still be making the same argument. When you got sort of the COVID going on, when you had lots of WhatsApp messages going back between the Chancellor, Prime Minister, advisors, I think they really are private conversations because, you know, the science was changing all the time. Lots of decisions had to be made. So I think the problem with this is it's like a conversation. isn't it, really? It's like having a private conversation, but it's not. And I think the trouble is, yes, we put much with inquiries, and it's good to have an inquiry, but when you look at some of these messages, perhaps in hindsight, it gets the wrong, you get the wrong side of it. Also, is it for transparency, or is it, for hyping the whole situation up? So I'm very mixed over this, because I think people were using WhatsApp because they thought it was a conversation. I think if it's not going to be, and it's all going to be in the public domain, then I suspect whether you ban WhatsApp or not, I think lots of MPs, lots of ministers will stop using it anyway, because it's not a private conversation, is it? In the end, it can be out in the public arena. So like I said, very mixed views over it, and I would have the same views if the Labour Party was in power and in government, because decisions have to be made sometimes on the heat of the moment, and I imagine some of these exchanges were probably quite heated.
Yes, indeed. I mean, Simon Janchuk, that's the point, isn't it? When the MPs were using this WhatsApp, they understood that it was private, that it was encrypted end-to-end. Nobody dreamed for a minute that one day there would be an inquiry which demanded that they hand them all over.
Yeah, that's right. And where I agree with Neil is that it's not a party political issue, but where I disagree with him is that you can't stop people or politicians from using WhatsApp. It's a smart form of communication, so I don't think we should ban politicians from using it. What I do think we need is some better regulation around what is transparent and what can be kept private. Now, that might mean redacting WhatsApp messages, or it might mean not publishing personal WhatsApp messages at all. But there does need to be better rules around it. There's no doubt about that, because politicians need to be able to make quick, efficient decisions, and WhatsApp's a good way of reaching those conclusions.
Is it one of the problems, Mr. Parish, that often on WhatsApp groups there are so many people you're not sure who most of them are, and included in that list can often be people who may be people that have a grudge against you, certainly within, say, civil servant groups, where there's that crossover. So isn't the best form of defence to just assume that anything that any MP puts on a WhatsApp could end up out there, and therefore just have better social media training?
Well, perhaps better training, but also I think if you want to have a private conversation, have a conversation. I mean, I'm of an older generation, and I think sometimes, when I was in the office, email this, email that, do this, do that, but immediately it is in the public domain and everybody knows about it. Now, hopefully most of what you're dealing with, that is fine. But if you're dealing with, like, a very stressful situation where, you've got to get really something sorted out very quickly, and perhaps in a very difficult situation, then yes. And I think the trouble that Simon's actually right about sort of adapting these things, but of course the moment you sort of shut something down, then immediately everybody decides that was something they should see. And I think what I'm worried about is, government needs to make decisions. Is it about transparency, or is it about getting, the really good story that will really stick on somebody? Because if they were actually trying to make the decision in the heat of the moment for the very right reasons, and I think most of our politicians on all sides are in government to try and do the right thing. They don't always get it right, but I think they should be allowed to communicate with each other. And I think WhatsApp is becoming very difficult. And I think you're absolutely right. I think it goes too far and wide, and I think we've got so used to the types of communications we use that we forget very often. People use Facebook and all these other things, don't they? And sometimes I don't think they realise it goes out to the whole world. It sounds mad because you ought to know that, but I think politicians are going to have to be much more careful as they use this in the future. But I think also you do need to be able to communicate very fast in government when it's a fast-moving situation, and COVID definitely was that, because I used to sit in the House of Commons, and you had different sort of medical advice half the time, and you had to make a decision, and certainly the Prime Minister and Chancellor had. The Chancellor always had the financial side to deal with as well, and the Prime Minister very much the sort of medical side as well. So I think,
I think you're making a good point there, Neil, but it seems counterintuitive, really, in terms of and the press won't like this, it seems counterintuitive. The public as well want all the information that's absolutely available. But the reality is that it can stunt good decision-making, and I think what we do need is some sort of regulation that ensures that messaging is kept private and can't be published. And I
Well,
suspect...
they'll know now, won't they?
Yeah.
That's the point. From now on, they'll know. Any decent MP would know. If you use WhatsApp, one day you might actually have to see it printed in the press.
And that's a concern to making good decisions, I think, and so we do need some sort of regulation. And I suspect in other countries, the media wouldn't be able to print all the public, all the private messages that politicians create.
And can I quickly ask you, Neil, do you think the decision Matt Hancock made to willingly give all of his WhatsApp messages to a journalist was one of the most idiotic decisions in modern political history?
Yeah. Shall I put it this way? I wouldn't have done it, and I think probably in hindsight, I suspect nor would he. So I'll be diplomatic for once in my life. But seriously, I think this is a really good debate to have, because in the end, decisions have to be made, and we've got to allow government to make them. And not everything is right to bring out in the daylight, long after the event and the heat of the moment. So let's try and get this right, because otherwise you'll impair government and ministers from making decisions on very quickly, which they very often need to do.
Absolutely. Thank you both very much indeed. Fascinating conversation. I must say, I was never shocked to find out they called each other rude names. I sort of understood that from the beginning.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Anyway, it's time to go through all the latest news, latest sports stories now, and of course we are joined by Aidan.
Good morning, how are you?
Now, can you tell us this? It's something that quite alarmed me when I read about it, and we don't know very much.
Yeah.
It's the young Liverpool footballer.
Luis Diaz.
Parents live in Luis Diaz, yeah, and he's Colombian, and his parents still live in Colombia. What's happened?
So it happened overnight, really. In our time, it was Saturday evening in Colombia. His parents were victim of an armed ambush by motorcycle kidnappers. Now, it's not uncommon in South America, actually. There have been some Premier League footballers in the last 10, 15 years who've fallen victim to this. Robinho back in 2004, I can remember, and Wilson Palacios, who...
So their family is vulnerable simply because they are wealthy footballers.
Yes,
and they're very famous.
and they demand a ransom. So, tragically for Wilson Palacios, who played under Harry Redknapp at Tottenham back in between 2009-10, his brother Edwin was actually kidnapped. They paid the ransom of £125,000, and his brother was murdered nonetheless. And the player found out about it on the morning of the game at Everton, and Harry had to deal with that and get him back to Honduras. But at the moment, the Colombian authorities are still searching for the father. The mother was recovered last night. They're not sure of the actual circumstances around it, and there is video footage available. The car was tracked down. The parents were travelling in.
They were driving in their car, I think, back from a football match,
That's right,
they?
yeah.
And so they're obviously very keen as a family on the football. And then these kidnappers on motorcycles obviously managed to stop the car, grab them both.
Yes.
But then somewhere along the line, she was allowed free, I think because they took the father off on a motorbike.
That's right, yeah, separately. So I mean, in this situation, they probably, if you're demanding a ransom, you probably only need one person.
That's right.
Yes.
And so, but she's shaken, she's scared, but she's safe. And we'll be hearing from Liverpool.
Can you imagine
the
pressure that young lad must be under?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's a long way from home as well. But we'll probably hear a statement later on from Liverpool Football Club, I would imagine. But yeah, this thing's I think I can counted about 10 cases of this in the last 15 years involving South American, South and Central American.
And it's always been a problem in the oil industry when people from companies, kidnapping, extortion, sadly, is big business in those parts of the world. Moving on to some other football news, Chelsea.
Yeah, another poor defeat for them. Yeah, exactly. They've lost to Forest, or your boys, earlier in the season at home. They lost to Aston Villa. They lost to Brentford yesterday, 2-0. Mauricio Pochettino, huge success at Southampton and Tottenham while he was in the Premier League. He's suffering the first bout of pressure in English football now, and they're down to 11th place in the division. They've spent absolute fortunes in the summer. £1 billion, I think, since Todd Bowley bought the club from Roman Abramovich. Later on today, we've got the Manchester United, Manchester City, Manchester derby at 3:30. Pep Guardiola saying that, quite mischievously, that Manchester United have never really been a rival to Manchester City since he arrived, because they've not really been challenging at the top table of English football.
That's got to hurt.
It has, exactly. And a word on Harry Kane and Jude Bellingham yesterday, not performing on these shores, of course, but Harry Kane scored from inside his own half, a David Beckham-style shot yesterday for Bayern Munich in an 8-0 win over Darmstadt. He scored a hat-trick. Jude Bellingham, more crucially, scored twice. This is the guy who many believe might be the best footballer on the planet at the moment, an English player, born in Birmingham, of course. He scored twice for Real Madrid last night in El Clasico in Barcelona, having trailed 1-0, so extraordinary for them.
And great news for England moving forward. Aidan McGee, always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Good to see you.
Right, our headline makers coming up, and we'll be finding out about the psychic on the aeroplane. Don't go away.
Just bizarre.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m. Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Welcome back. It's 7:43. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Anne and Martin.
It's time for Headline Makers. And joining us to go through some of the day's headlines, David Hamilton. I was going to say he was a broadcaster and everything, but you know David Hamilton. You always have. And writer and journalist Emma Wolfe. And thank you and greetings to you both. Right, we're going to start, David, with talking about the Dinosaur Hour, because clearly you want to be on it. And this...
I thought it was actually named after me.
Well, I think a lot of people probably think that as well. Not of you, but of them. Because this is John Cleese, who's coming to GB News. And he's going to have a programme on a Sunday evening called The Dinosaur Hour. Have you seen any of it yet at all?
Well, we saw a clip earlier, and I think we've got another clip now.
We have got another one. We've got a lovely one of John talking to Stephen Fry.
If you post something on social media, surely it would be very easy to have an identification on that post which would tell you who'd posted it, which would shame people into posting a lot of the nastiest stuff.
Yes.
Why don't they do it?
Well, in the case of Twitter, Elon Musk is a libertarian, free speech absolutist, he calls himself, and I think he would regard any regulation which enforced something like that, a denial of anonymity and the right to anonymity.
But a denial of anonymity.
I agree with you.
You're not forcing it on people.
No.
What you're saying is if you want to post something,
People
you
should know
have
who
to
you
tell people who you are.
I think it's a mixture of genuine sense that they want it to be a free space where people can comment without being got at, for example. Because the problem is, you might express a view in some of the hot button issues of today. You might express a view on gender and something like that, and you will get shat upon on both sides. Doesn't matter which side.
But that's the problem about expressing a view anyway.
Well, it is. It is. And so anonymity gives a sort of confidence to some, but confidence to terrible people, as we know. It's a disaster. And I
put things on Twitter, as you do.
I used to, yes.
You don't anymore?
No, I'm afraid once Mr. Musk got there, I just felt no.
Oh, I know.
And this is why you mustn't believe anything I say about the future, because I believed when in 2007, when I joined Twitter and it was just starting, I believed that it would melt away boundaries and divisions and the old problems, and that we would all be brothers and sisters.
But the problem with technology is there are always good people who will use it for good reasons, and then there are rather bad people who will use it for bad reasons.
Yes.
And that's true of everything that's ever been invented.
I look at the Gutenberg's first printing press, and you look at it, that is capable of printing the poems of John Keats or Mein Kampf.
Fascinating, you see, actually, watching. I mean, you could say two dinosaurs interviewing each other there. I don't know whether Stephen Fry would like that. But what was really weird, just to describe it, if you're listening on the radio at the moment, is to see John Cleese and Stephen Fry nattering away there. In the background, two nuns looking as though they're having a pint, and a cat, somebody stroking a cat in the foreground. It's got this lovely, friendly feel about it, as though you've just dropped in on interesting conversations that are being had by those people.
Yeah.
That's what happens to a python when he grows into a dinosaur.
Yeah.
But interestingly, talking of Monty Python, David, you were on Monty Python?
I did appear on a Monty Python show, yes. I was announcing at Thames Television at the time, and they asked, could they have the Thames ident, and could they have me introduce the programme? So what I said was, good evening, some great programmes for you tonight on Thames, but first, here's a rotten old show on the BBC.
And they kept you on that.
They used it, and that was when I met John Cleese for the first time. It was great to meet him and the rest of the gang. It was when it began, really. It was, the very first series. Didn't know, what a sort of cult series it was going to be.
Well, no, it was weird, wasn't it? Yeah. Did you ever understand Python?
No, I didn't.
I didn't understand all of it.
Dinosaur Claire. OK, they are dinosaurs and they're sort of self-avowed dinosaurs. But what they were discussing there about Twitter and anonymity and social media is absolutely, that's not an oldie person's issue.
Right. Yeah.
They're not discussing incontinence pants. They're talking about something which all of us, and I think Twitter, over the past few months, the past year, we've really seen a ramping up of the hate and the anonymity and the kind of...
Try getting involved in the Brexit movement. It's been like that since 2016.
Massively, yeah, OK. But I think since Elon Musk has taken over, it's gone downhill. But they're discussing something that's very, very current. So
but
it's an interesting take on it.
I think that's an important point you just made, is that they're not discussing incontinence pants. Old people don't just want to talk about old things. I remember my mum saying it to me. She said, people think you only want to hear tunes from the Second World War.
No.
And, and stuff like that. And actually, no, my mum was right with it, doing her iPad and everything. Older people don't just think older things, do they?
Absolutely.
And that's what, clearly, this programme's going to be
and
about.
The first one is 9 o'clock this evening. Let's move on to your story here, Emma. We were just talking about Matt Hancock actually being something of a village idiot on his WhatsApp admission, giving all his messages.
That's a polite way of putting it, village idiot. I can think of a few.
He gave all his WhatsApp messages to a journalist. He must have expected the worst. Another story here. The NHS spent millions on a failed AI doctor app backed by Matt Hancock.
Yeah, guess what? Ever heard of Babylon Health? No, I haven't either. Well, Matt Hancock, former health secretary, at the biggest crisis, really, for the health service of our generation, probably of the last century, gave Babylon Health around £22 million over the past 3 years for a flawed or a failed AI app. It was a bot. It was a bot that was going to triage patients and prevent them from going to A&E. Fairly straightforward. It failed to recognise the signs of a heart attack. It failed to recognise the signs of suspected blood clots, dangerous blood clots. It had 3 contracts signed up by Matt Hancock, 3 contracts across NHS trusts. All of those contracts have been ripped up. Absolutely. I mean, if Matt Hancock, you know, he went to these kind of wazzy launches and these shiny launches and he likes a bit of tech. So he completely failed to assess the actual technology here.
Is that entirely fair, though? If you look at it in the context of everybody wondering how on earth to expedite things when it came down to COVID, I mean, maybe mistakes were always going to be made.
Yeah, and a lot of them by Matt Hancock. I mean, if you're health secretary, you need to, I don't know, but I mean, this is just another example. You know, look at the millions wasted on PPE, PPI, all of those things. And the NHS seems to be incapable of having a functioning technological, digital, 21st century system.
And isn't that ironic? Because this week, of course, Rishi Sunak making a huge play that the UK should be the centre of the world of AI. And here we are.
Underfunded.
I'll tell you what worries me about AI. People say that it will be unsafe in the wrong hands. So what are the right hands?
Yeah,
are we
and
the right?
They say that AI will take over.
Are we the right hands?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, in the world today, what are the right hands?
That brings us on to...
Does one hand know what the other's doing?
Well, indeed.
No. What does one leg know what the other's doing in Strictly, David?
Yeah, do you watch Strictly?
No.
You two? Are you three?
I've got to say, I'm not a fan.
I know Emma doesn't, because she doesn't watch any... She hasn't even got a television.
But lots of people out there do.
You just lost me all my work. Thank you for announcing that.
A lot of people do, and there's a great deal of controversy at the moment because Strictly stars are becoming increasingly furious at having to compete against professional West End star Leighton Williams. Now, he starred when he was quite young in Billy Elliot, but he says that the point is that he is not a ballroom dancer. He's scored 39 points out of 40 over the last 2 weeks. And there's a general feeling that the standard this year has become very sort of semi-professional, and that the charm of Strictly was that it was people who couldn't dance, and then eventually...
Some of them did.
With the aid of the pros, they did.
Or even those who never did. I mean, for example, Anne Widdecombe being sort of flung around like a sack of spuds. And I say that as a friend of Anne's. I think was fantastic and hilarious because it made it, she's just like me.
I can understand their worry here. If Leighton... I didn't realise Leighton Williams was once a Billy Elliot.
Yes,
he was. That means he's got it, doesn't it? I mean, it means he's got it.
He has been a dancer, but he is saying not ballroom. That's his point.
Yeah, but...
Yeah.
What do you see?
Bit naughty, isn't it?
Yes, I think so. Whereas Angela Rippon was a professional journalist and newsreader.
Yes.
That's what she was. The fact that we all knew that she was a good dancer, she was just that in her spare time.
That's it, yeah.
That was just a coincidence.
It was a hobby, but she's a very good hobby, but she's not a trained
And frankly,
pro.
she's also 79, which is out of this world.
She is incredible, isn't she? Really amazing.
I mean, I've seen clips of her, and wow. And I'm waiting for her to win. But I didn't realise Leighton is putting up a good fight for the title as well.
He's doing well. He's the hot favourite now.
No.
He might win the vote, and that's a nice little segue, Emma, to this. I'm fascinated by this. The none of the above party could be a huge factor at the next election, as people just don't know who to vote for.
People just don't know. Well, we're all obsessed with this idea. I mean, it's just been announced that it might be a Halloween and October 31st ghoulish election next year. Media, Westminster bubble people are obsessed with, it's 12 months till the election's looming. We say all this. Most voters are not even thinking about an election. About 90% of people haven't even registered. They're thinking about the winter, the school bills, the Christmas, whatever's happening in their lives. And so while we have Labour streets ahead, I mean, they may well be about 20 points ahead, other polls, and the Express are saying they've run polls, saying that actually Labour is not as far ahead as that. The gap is smaller than has been kind of widely publicised, and that Tory MPs shouldn't be panicking, and that it's all to play for. And I think that's true. I think so much to play for, so much can happen. Look, last week Labour were absolutely jubilant. They'd had their double Tory by-election defeats. They were riding high. They were readying themselves for number 10. Now Starmer is mired in all sorts of grief over the Israel-Gaza situation.
And of course, the Brexit referendum, none of the polling caught that, because so many people who'd never voted at all before voted for Brexit, and so they just came from nowhere to change history.
And also because if you said you were going to vote for Brexit, you were sneered at. There were so many secret people who just thought,
yes,
exactly
they
like
voted
Trump.
in secret.
So many people who actually feel strongly and won't say it.
Yep.
OK, well, we're going to leave it there. We still haven't got on to the psychic on the aeroplane. We're going to have to move on to that a bit later on. Don't go away then. Yes, you come back, please. Right, let's catch up with your very latest weather.
Good morning. My name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So the first half of the weekend was fairly unsettled, but what will Sunday bring? Well, last night's rain is now across northern England and Scotland, bringing some fairly heavy and persistent rain here for much of the day. Elsewhere, it's a mixture of sunshine and showers, and these will be most frequent and heaviest across southern and western coasts. It's the central slice of the UK that's going to see the driest and brightest weather and feeling pretty pleasant in any sunny spells here, away from the strong winds across the north and south coast. So as we go through tonight, that rain is going to continue across eastern parts of Scotland. Showers continuing elsewhere as well, but still a few clear spells, especially in the east. And this is where we're going to see some of the lowest temperatures as we go through tonight and to the start of the new working week, but still not expecting a frost around for Monday morning. So through Monday then, it's another day of sunshine and showers for many though. We will start to see those showers easing a little though along the south coast as we go through the day. Rain continuing still though across eastern parts of Scotland. They're becoming slightly more patchy in nature, and those winds now coming from the north across Scotland, so feeling slightly cooler here, still clinging on to something slightly warmer across the south though.
Right, thank you very much indeed. That's your weather for you. Do stay with us here on Breakfast on GB News. We'll be bringing you right up to date with what's going on in Israel, of course, at the moment. And then if you've just woken up and switched on the telly or the radio, you'll be hearing about the very sad death of Matthew Perry, the star of Friends. And we'll be giving you the very latest on that as well. So stay with us. You're watching Breakfast on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Put in your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good morning, it's 8 o'clock on Sunday the 29th of October. Today, in shock breaking news, Friends star Matthew Perry has died, aged just 54. The US-Canadian actor, best known for his iconic role as Chandler in Friends, was found dead at his home, and tributes are pouring in from all over the world.
And in Israel, the second stage of the invasion has begun. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel's ground invasion of Gaza will signify a long and difficult war. Mark White is live from Tel Aviv with all the latest.
Well, Israeli Defense Forces have said that they have struck 450 Hamas targets in the last day. Despite this, though, as we speak, more rocket fire coming out of Hamas territory towards those troops on the border with Gaza.
100,000 people turned out in London to protest Israel's bombing of Gaza, calling for a ceasefire on humanitarian grounds. 9 people were arrested, with some incidents being treated as suspected hate crimes.
And the Labour Party are at the centre of a nepotism row as the Partygate investigator Sue Gray's son joins the running to become a candidate for Labour at the next general election. And that's as divisions continue to grow over the party's stance on the conflict in the Middle East.
And right across the Atlantic, Donald Trump takes aim at Joe Biden, calling him totally incoherent, claiming the Israel-Hamas war would never have started if he were president. So we'll be debating that, whether Trump should become the next Republican nominee.
And of course, Rachel Ayres will have your weather forecast.
Persistent rain across Scotland today and sunshine and showers elsewhere with some blustery winds. Join me later for a full forecast with all the details.
Well, thanks for being with us this Sunday morning. I'm Anne Diamond.
I'm Martin Daubney, and this is Breakfast on GB News.
And of course, there are very serious matters going on all over the world at the moment, and we will be bringing you right up to date with what's happening in Israel at the moment. But I think a lot of people have been very shocked at the news that's come in overnight about Matthew Perry from Friends, because I think so many people thought he was a friend of theirs.
That's right, yeah. And Jackie has said this. My earliest memory is we were travelling to Blackpool in 1995 and my daughter, who was 6 at the time, singing the theme tune over and over again. She met her classmate, now husband in Year 7, who equally enjoyed watching Friends. As they went through their teenage years and into adulthood, they would say the lines as the cast did. When they got married in 2021, her husband, during the vows, recreated the wedding scene and called her Rachel. Everyone laughed. The vicar, not sure what she was laughing at, but joined in anyway. Matthew will be very sadly missed. A lovely story.
Yes, it's a lovely story. And that's what struck me about when they did the Friends reunion, and they just got them all together. They seem to have the same sense of humour, and they seem to have remained very real friends for years and years and years. And you can only imagine how the rest of the cast must be feeling, and all the producers who got to know them so well, because that programme lasted 10 years.
Yeah, and even though he'd had well-documented struggles, of course, 54 is no age for anybody to be dying. Sad news indeed.
So to bring you up to date with the news that's just come in overnight, the American-Canadian actor, comedian and producer Matthew Perry, best known for his role as Chandler, well, he's died. We don't know an awful lot about why, but reports suggest that he drowned in his jacuzzi at home.
Yeah, the 54-year-old died at the actor's home in LA after local police received a call around 4 p.m. local time.
All of the news sources at the moment suggest there's no apparent foul play and no confirmed cause of death, as an investigation now is ongoing.
Well, joining us now in the studio is executive producer and comedy scriptwriter Dan Warren. Dan, still reeling over this news over here in Britain as we wake up. Well-documented struggles in the past. His recent memoir detailing how he almost died once of a colon problem. But recently, been clean living, turned his health around, so it still comes as a huge shock, this news.
Yeah, it's. I mean, Hollywood, not just Hollywood, the whole world is in shock because I think no matter what your age, at some point you grew up with the character Chandler Bing in your lives. When it was first out in the 90s, I was at secondary school then, and you know, you would always play the game of which friend are you relate to most. And there was a Facebook app which used to take a test to say which one of the friends are you. And I would always end up with the Chandler character by chance. And I think that the fact is, you know, each character was relatable.
Go on, what was the Chandler character then?
I think the Chandler character was... but sort of not confident, certainly not confident around the females. That's certainly me, and a real appalling history of dating, and also can sort of come across quite camp at times, I think, and that's why I like with the Monica and Chandler chemistry, that she almost seemed a bit more tougher and certainly you know, wore the trousers, if you like, compared to...
Yeah, so he was a bit of a softie.
Yeah, and the writers were really worried. In fact, the actors more so, when they decided to put them together, it was going to be a one-off, and then they decided, actually, we'll run with this story and get them married, and the actors were thinking they're not going to like us anymore with our popularity because we've become a couple. But again, the careful writing made sure that there was, you know, the journey along the way, and it certainly didn't ruin any of that.
You see, as a writer, you must have watched it later on, maybe after secondary school. You must have watched it with a writer's eyes, and there's no doubt you can't help but be impressed by, well, obviously the comedy, but the quality of the writing.
Absolutely, you know, it was the whole process. They wouldn't just write a script and go, okay, well, you know, we'll do a read through, we'll go through it. They just knew it's all about beats, it's all about timing, and every single cast member, you know, had to deliver that timing. If something felt a bit flat, it's not a case of we're running out of time, we'll go with it. It's a production that had the luxury of having a budget, so they could overrun to ensure that timing, if they had to reshoot something because it wasn't quite right.
Can you explain how they used to shoot it? Because I've seen documentaries about the making of it. I'm that much of a nerd about Friends, but I think we all are, aren't we? They shot it in front of a live television audience. How does that work?
So essentially, at first, it's the writers, and like in the UK, for example, you know, our big sitcoms are Only Fools and Horses. You know, it's John Sullivan by himself, whereas in the US, there's at least 20, if not more, writers. You've obviously got the three main showrunners, as they call them, but they're just rewriting each other's scenes till it's as tight as possible.
Well, even doing that in real time, how the audience reacts.
And then what happens is then they bring the cast in, and the cast will then make their notes. That's when they then do a dress rehearsal in front of the audience, and they just keep rewriting, even when they're doing a full-on production.
Sounds like really hard work.
And a lot of the time, Matthew Perry would be making the last so many sort of last amendments that shooting would overrun, because he you know, they gauged him for timing, not just for his character but for the others.
That is why what we saw was such highly polished gems.
And it's
they've been through such a process.
And it's unfortunate because he's written a lot of others. There's a sitcom called Mr. Sunshine that was on ABC, only lasted one season. Unfortunately, once you know, your breakthrough role was Friends, anything else, it's just too big, you know, bar to hit. All really good from a comedy writer point of view, but because it got compared to Friends, he just... In the end, he admitted he will always be Chandler. Yeah,
of course. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with always being Chandler, and he will, won't he? Shall we have a look at him in action at his very best?
first guy was me, and it was me who would learn that it was me who was the best you'd ever had, I'd be going like this.
Oh, well, there we are. We could only show you a very, very short clip there, but it is one of the most, the series most all over the world transmitted still. I think it's a fact. It's one of those record facts that anywhere you go in the world at the moment and you switch on the telly in a hotel or something, it'll always be Friends. Might sometimes be dubbed into a different language,
Well, I was
but
in
it's
Rhodes
there.
last week. It was on in the hotel in Rhodes last week. There we go, global.
Well, there you go, absolutely. OK, earlier on we were talking to our showbiz expert, Kinsey. This is what she had to say.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Martin. What we do know is that he played pickleball for 2 hours on Saturday morning, that he had asked his assistant to go run some errands. The assistant says that they were gone for about 2 hours, and then when they returned, they found Matthew unconscious in his jacuzzi. Now, there was a 911 phone call made where a cardiac arrest incident was mentioned over the phone. We don't know if that's in any way, shape, or form associated, but the words cardiac arrest are utilized when it comes to that initial call. We believe that he drowned in his jacuzzi, and TMZ is reporting that there were no drugs found at the scene. This is a man. And aside from the 2 hours of pickleball, this is a man who we have seen working on his body and challenging his body over the last few weeks. One of the last paparazzi photos taken of Matthew was on October 3rd as he exited a gym. So I know that there is speculation in regards to his past, and could some of those demons have come back to haunt him when it comes to addiction? But he, over the last year or so, I'd say 2 years now, was very proud of his sobriety, promoted his sobriety, and was focused on being better physically and mentally.
We know, of course, don't we, that his professional friends, as it were real friends in real life, and they will be devastated, as will the whole of Hollywood. In fact, his reach was all over the world, wasn't it?
Well, I mean, Anne, did you know that he went to school with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau? I had no idea. Justin Trudeau actually tweeted, "Matthew Perry's passing is shocking and saddening. I'll never forget the schoolyard games we used to play, and I know people around the world are never going to forget the joy he brought to them. Thanks for all the laughs, Matthew. You were loved, and you will be missed." Matthew's mother was actually the press secretary for Justin's father in Canada. Isn't that, wonderful? And Justin's stepfather is a very well-respected journalist here in the States. And he said a few months ago to People magazine, just talking about how his stepson, Matthew Perry, he called him remarkable and said, "We love having him around," and described him as intense, talented, and a focused character. So I think you're absolutely right. People are devastated all over the world.
That was Kinsey Schofield talking to us a bit earlier. The news broke overnight from Los Angeles. And if you've only just woken up and switched on the TV, you'll probably find it quite shocking news, because he was so well known, as all the Friends were, all over the world. And we sort of grew up with them, and even our kids grew up with them. And you can't go anywhere in the world without seeing it somewhere on the television. And he will be sadly missed. But his legacy will go on, won't he? Friends is going to go on and on and on.
I suspect there'll be a massive uptick in people going back through their old box sets, going through...
It's going to be one of the first things you probably do today, isn't it? So, I must watch my favourite episode.
And that's the memory, the legacy that will live on, the good times.
Do get in touch if you've got any thoughts on that. Maybe you've got a favourite episode or a favourite character. gbviews@gbnews.com. At 8:13 then, let's move on to the situation in the Middle East, because it's very interesting now that, breaking with historical norms, the International Committee of the Red Cross has apparently called for a humanitarian pause in the fighting in Gaza.
And that's as the Israeli Prime Minister says we will now be entering the second phase of the war as the Israeli Defense Forces claim to have struck more than 450 targets in Gaza overnight.
But in a relief to many, some phone lines and internet connections have apparently returned to Gaza after Israel cut them off yesterday. We'll talk now to our security editor, Mark White, who's in Tel Aviv. Mark, tell us more about what the Red Cross have actually called for.
Well, they're calling for a de-escalation in the conflict, not calling for a ceasefire. Now, the International Red Cross never normally interferes in the course of a war except to quietly remind those on both sides to abide by the Geneva Convention. But because of the unique situation in Gaza, where you have hundreds of thousands of people still in northern Gaza, in direct line of fire, and I should say this is just our alert system going off again. It's been going relatively frequently. Apologies for that, but we need to keep it switched on just so that we can actually hear if there's an alert in our area. This is around the Gaza Strip, I should say. Despite the pummeling that these Hamas positions have been given in the last few days, they still clearly have the capability to launch these rockets. They're currently launching them towards Israeli communities around the Gaza Strip on the Israeli side, and indeed those Israeli forces that are massing on that side of the Gaza Strip as well. But getting back to that point with the International Red Cross, what they're saying effectively is that there should be a humanitarian pause as such and a de-escalation. Now, that's not dissimilar to what the UK, the US and others are calling for in terms of a humanitarian pause to allow more aid trucks in. They're also, I should add, condemning Hamas and its use of civilians as human shields, and also condemning Hamas in terms of the continued holding of these hostages and urging Hamas to release these hostages as a matter of urgency. But nevertheless, still unusual for the International Red Cross to come out as publicly to call for a de-escalation in this conflict.
Thank you very much, Mark. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us this morning live from Tel Aviv.
Now, it was amazing how those alerts were going off on his phone, which are compulsory if you're a journalist in the area, and that was indicating that another salvo of bombs were incoming. So there we are, right from the front line live.
No matter who is calling for a pause or a de-escalation or a ceasefire, it doesn't sound as though it's going to happen, does it? And that's certainly what Prime Minister Netanyahu has been saying. Shall we move on to local politics? Well, local, I mean domestic. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, is under pressure once again as his chief of staff, who you'll remember is now Sue Gray, well, she's found herself at the centre of what you could call a nepotism row.
Yeah, that's because it's been revealed her son has now applied to run as the Labour candidate in the Beckenham and Penge seat in South East London. Sue Gray, of course, is known for being the controversial former civil service servant tasked with writing the Partygate report.
And, of course, that all comes as Keir Starmer's party is growing increasingly rebellious over Labour's official stance on the Israel-Hamas conflict, because senior Labour figures in the shadow cabinet, as well as the London Mayor Sadiq Khan, the Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham and the Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar, well, they've all called for immediate ceasefire.
Well, joining us now to discuss this is the leader of the Heritage Party, David Curtin. Top of the morning to you, David. Let's start with this nepotism row, as it's being branded by at least the Tory press. Sue Gray's son on the shortlist hasn't been selected yet. Is this a storm in a teacup, or is it further evidence of nepotism within the Labour Party?
Well, I mean, this does have precedent, because you did have Neil Kinnock was the leader of the Labour Party back in the early 90s, and then his son Stephen Kinnock became a Labour MP in a very safe Labour seat. So, I mean, this seems to be a family that supports Labour, but Sue Gray herself presented herself as someone who was independent, which perhaps is not, a slight misrepresentation of the truth if she did in her heart support Labour for all those years. We don't know, we can't say, but she is now Sir Keir Keir Starmer's chief of staff. But I mean, her son, I think, was a Labour activist for many years. He was pictured with Sir Keir Starmer 3 years ago. So he's obviously been part of the Labour Party as an independent young man and is working his way through the ranks and through the procedures. So I'm not sure that him trying to go to be an MP is the main focus of the story. But the main question still remains, if you're talking about Sue Gray, was she truly independent when she was writing the Partygate report? Perhaps there's more discussion that needs to be done on that.
Well, I've no doubt there will be more discussion now, certainly. But back to Labour's problems at the moment. Just a few weeks ago, they were riding absolutely high, terribly thrilled with their success at those by-elections. Now there are real problems afoot. It's almost as though there's a little bit of a split going on because of their official stance over the war that's going on in the Middle East at the moment. Should they be openly supporting Israel, as it appears Keir Starmer is doing, or should they be, in their very old-fashioned way, pro-Palestinian and calling for ceasefires? What do you think?
I think the wise thing to do would be to support neither side, but support people, support an end to the slaughter that is going on. I mean, this is a very old conflict, Israel-Palestine, that's been going on for 70, 75 years. And it's really difficult to unpack because how far back do you go to find the beginning of this? So, I mean, I'm just concerned about the fact that people are dying on both sides and we need to stop the slaughter. So, I mean, I've called for de-escalation and a ceasefire. A number of top Labour people have called for a ceasefire as well. And I think he was unwise to give the impression that he supported Israel being allowed to do whatever it wants, including cutting off water and electricity to Gaza, because then 2.2 million people, many of whom are completely innocent, are going to suffer. So, I mean, that's what's caused the backlash. And of course, there are many, many Muslims in the Labour Party. It's really their party. I don't know what percentage, but I would imagine a quarter to a third of the members of the Labour Party are Muslim, and in many parliamentary constituency organisations and local councils and local councillors are Muslims, and they are naturally going to support the Palestinian cause. So he does have a very, very big problem if he is not going to take their views into account, because they're a big part of the Labour Party.
OK, David Curtin, thank you for joining us. We have to leave it there. And interestingly, Keir Starmer said to MPs yesterday, don't attend the protest. Well, John McDonnell did and Nadia Whittome did, MP for Nottingham East. So this one is rumbling on.
Yes, and it could grow and grow as well, so that'll be one to watch. Something else that the Prime Minister wants us to watch carefully is AI. He wants Britain to lead the world when it comes to AI, and as such is holding this big summit at Bletchley Park, to which he's invited many world leaders and leaders in the world of that sort of technology. Well, now there's a row over whether China should be invited, and that is going on.
Yeah, Liz Truss wrote to Rishi Sunak to say she is deeply disturbed with that decision to invite Chinese delegates to be invited. She also said China is seeking to subvert freedom and democracy.
When Downing Street assert the security services will review how public sector bodies can prevent Beijing from infiltration.
Well, joining us now is the Conservative MP and former chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood. Top of the morning to you, Tobias. Always a pleasure. So, do you think Liz Truss has a point? I mean, a lot of eyebrows are raised, certainly here at GB News. We covered that speech live earlier this week when Rishi invited China. We thought, is that wise?
No, absolutely it is wise, and we shouldn't distance ourselves from anything that China has done or try to apologize for it. Absolutely, we need to hold China to account. But we can do that better if we set up and establish the rules for artificial intelligence. And I think we're only just beginning to appreciate the massive impact this is going to have on every aspect of our lives. There are no agreed international rules. So if we can actually get everybody to sign up, then it's actually easier to hold China to account if they break them. I need to stress from my perspective, a military security perspective, technological innovation has always for centuries advanced the character of conflict, and AI is going to do the same. We saw this in going back to the longbow at Agincourt, or the Gatling gun in the Civil War, the tank in the First World War, then the nuclear bomb. And AI is going to be another one of those massive jumps in advancing the dimensions of warfare. And there is a comparison with the double-edged sword of nuclear power. That, of course, has huge civilian use, but also massive destructive use, with the nuclear bomb. And it prompted President Eisenhower in 1953, his Atoms for Peace speech, to call for the immediate, verifiable, regulatory use of nuclear power. And I'm really pleased that this Prime Minister, our Prime Minister today, is looking to do the same with AI. It does lag behind, I have to say, because if we're honest, the collective understanding of AI in Parliament and probably, the wider society is still low. We're catching up with what this is going to do. I can't emphasize just how ruthless it will be in advancing and changing the character conflict on the battlefield.
But it's a bit pie in the sky, isn't it, to think that we are going to lead the world with AI? I mean, surely that's going to happen in Silicon Valley, isn't it? Which is why President Biden may be not bothering to come.
Not at all.
No?
No, not at all. Whether President Biden himself comes or not, I can't stress we need to have those international rules as to what's going on. Otherwise, we do. The world has entered a very, very dangerous place, as we've been discussing this morning. AI is that military force multiplier, which will totally reshape, the rules of war. And if we don't have those rules, it will be to the advantage of whoever gets there first. And because our world's becoming more dangerous, not less, it's so important that we confirm what those rules are. I would say the one thing Britain is good at, the one thing I'd like us to advance towards, is being a high-tech superpower. To some degree, we're already there. When you think about our aerospace systems, what we've done in pharmaceuticals and so on, and in the space world, this is what Britain can be good at in the future. Not taking away the fact, of course, that Silicon Valley is doing a great job. But look where Britain is today. Look what we're good at. Look what our universities are doing. I think I'm really pleased to see our Prime Minister recognise the importance of taking responsibility, which is what Britain's actually good at, seeing where the world's going to and saying, look, we need some verified rules to make sure that our world remains safe as we move forward.
Well, that's all fine and dandy, but of course Biden isn't turning up, Macron isn't turning up, Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, isn't turning up, Justin Trudeau isn't turning up. So how can we get the world to listen to us if their leaders aren't even bothering to be on the guest list?
This is the start of a conversation. As I say, I think the penny is beginning to drop, just how game-changing AI will be. As I stress, it's a very positive thing. There's so many aspects of our life that will benefit from AI, but there's also so many aspects of it which are so dangerous indeed if they're advanced by non-state or state actors themselves. AI will remove the fog of war, if you like, the masses of data that any senior commander must digest, enemy's strengths and weaknesses and so forth, in contrast to your own. And they can provide, immediate solutions, removing hesitance, human error, even misguided heroism and so forth, or the utility of swarmed unmanned systems and so on. It's so important that we set out the rules as well, even in the grey zone as well. Large-scale disinformation, AI, if you think of farm bots, what they could do to alter and affect, decisions and societal viewpoints. So important that we get Geneva Conventions, if you like, set in place. So this is the beginning of the conversation. But you're absolutely right. And the questions that you imply, it's going to be a long road to make sure we get there.
And we've got to be in it, absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. Lovely to talk to you as ever, Tobias Ellwood there. And coming up in the next few minutes, we're going to be debating this one. It might be inevitable. Should Donald Trump, be the next Republican nominee? You're watching Breakfast on GB News.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Acquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's
my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Welcome back. It's exactly 8:30. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Anne and Martin. Before we move on, let me just say everybody's getting in touch now about Matthew Perry. And Susie says, for instance, morning Susie, I'm totally devastated about Matthew Perry. We have lost a friend who made us laugh so much.
Yeah, Alison adds, he gave hundreds of hours of happiness to me and my family.
Yeah. Well, he literally did that, I think. And Matt says, everyone's rightfully pointing out his contribution to the show Friends, but don't forget the fantastic Hollywood films he starred in too. And he did do many.
And also he starred in The West Wing, which is a nice segue into our next item.
Oh, very, very good. Yeah. Take it away.
Yeah, so Donald Trump has told some of the biggest Jewish donors that his support for Israel is unwavering.
Yeah, he was speaking at the Republican Jewish Convention, and the former US president said, America will not be apologising for standing side by side with Israel.
We will fully support the Israelis in their mission to ensure that Hamas is decimated and these atrocities will be avenged. They will be avenged. In many ways, they'll be avenged. I think even beyond what you're thinking about. For 4 straight years, I kept America safe, I kept Israel safe, and I kept the world safe. The world was a safer place, a much safer place. Today, the world is blowing up all around, no matter where you look. If I were president, the attack on Israel would never, ever have happened.
Well, earlier at the same event, former Vice President Mike Pence also spoke, and he announced he was withdrawing from the Republican race.
Last June, I announced my intention to seek the Republican nomination for President of the United States because I believe this country is in a lot of trouble. I was raised to believe that to whom much is given, much will be required. And with everything our country is facing, I just couldn't sit this one out. But the Bible tells us that there's a time for every purpose under heaven. And traveling across the country over the past 6 months, I came here to say it's become clear to me this is not my time.
Gosh, he was upset, wasn't he?
Yeah, a night of high drama in America, Las Vegas, with everything going on in US politics. The big question remains, should Donald Trump be the Republican nominee?
And if so, who'll be his running mate? Joining us now, US political analyst Dr. Jan Halper-Hayes, who says, I think Trump should be nominated, and Chair of Republicans Overseas, Greg Swenson, who says that DeSantis should be nominated instead. So good morning to both. Good morning.
Why don't we start with you, Jan? It was an eat-all-you-can buffet of pure red meat populism. He was saying there wouldn't be a war in Israel if I was in charge. He was talking about closing the border on day one. He was on fine form. Why do you think he's still the man for the job?
Well, if you just look at the reaction of the public, no one wants war. It was predicted that he would put us in World War III, and he didn't. The only president in decades who did not put us in a war. He is as in tune, if not more in tune, with what the public wants and also what the country and the world needs. And he is ostensibly still the commander-in-chief. So he's not actively that, but he is working very well behind the scenes.
And Greg, obviously, he's playing to his base. Everything he said in last night was being hooped and hollered and high-fived by the people who already support him. But you have greater concerns, don't you, that Trump may be a tad divisive for the centre ground, and therefore that's why you're Camp DeSantis.
And it's not necessarily that I'm trying to appeal, or I would want someone to appeal to the centre or more moderates, because DeSantis is anything but. You know, Ron DeSantis is more conservative than Trump, probably more conservative than anybody else in the race, with maybe the exception of Mike Pence, who just dropped out. So, and by all means, you know, I supported Trump when he was president, and surely if he wins the nomination, I'll support him again. But I think there's reasons to prefer Ron DeSantis, one of which is he could serve 2 terms. I think the governor's handling of COVID and how he would have handled Fauci, which I would imagine he'd fire him. You know, so Trump wasn't perfect, but his accomplishments were great. And I think especially in the forum last night, given that it was a large Republican Jewish organization, you know, they really support Trump. So, you know, he was in a very fertile audience for him. He also spoke last, and let's face it, his policies and his outcomes, specifically on Israel, but just generally speaking on foreign policy, were very good. So I think this was a good forum for him last night.
Were his accomplishments great, though, or was he just lucky? You said, I mean, he was the only president recently not to take us into a war, but maybe that was just the luck of those 4 years.
Oh, we can't not say luck. That is definitely... Donald Trump plays 5-degree chess. He is so smart, and he thinks about things well in advance. So, no. And we would not be in Ukraine, and we would not be in this problem with Israel right now either. You know, my concerns, people thought that DeSantis would be like a mini Trump. But when DeSantis has a Karl Rove and has an advisor and has the Bushies financing him, that is a concern, because just like we have Obama's 3rd term right now, I don't think the public wants Bush's 3rd term. But I'm worried for DeSantis. I have 2 feelings about it. One is that I had seen him in Florida in March 2020, and there was no indication he wanted to be president. The never-Trumpers, the donor class, have pushed him into it, and I hope they haven't ruined his chances for the future.
Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but I would say that he has so much political capital. In many ways, he had to run. You know, to not run after that, you know, that massive win in November of 22, it would have been almost, you know, a real political mistake. not to run. But I think, going back to the foreign policy, I think the outcomes were fantastic. But remember, President Trump surrounded himself with good people. The question is, would those good people work for him again? If you look at his policy moving the embassy to Jerusalem, Mike Pence really pushed that. So did Jared Kushner. Both of those guys are not to be seen anywhere near Trump. The Golan Heights situation, that was Friedman, the ambassador to Israel, Jared, Bolton. Killing Soleimani, very wise, polled well in the public. That was all Mike Pompeo. And Supreme Court, Mitch McConnell, obviously. The economy, Paul Ryan. You could call them never Trumpers or moderates or Bushies, but same with his Russia policy. That was, H.R. McMaster, Jim Mattis. All these people have had now personal feuds with Trump since then. So that's one of my concerns.
Well, it's not just it's not just personal feuds. Yeah. What Trump did, because he knew he had to clean out the deep state, and also you're an entrepreneur, I'm an entrepreneur. We know how to get rid of people that are not performing. But he needed the deep staters in there to expose what was going on. We've got Christopher Miller, who is still acting defense secretary, sort of shadow cabinet. We've got Kash Patel. There are a lot of people, Ezra Cohen. We've got a lot of people that have that experience and would come back in. But the other thing, Greg, that worries me, what just came out in Florida is the Republican Assembly, not the legislation, it's a private organization, have just asked DeSantis to drop out because they feel he's ignoring the issues that really got him elected and reelected in Florida. And I don't want anything bad to happen for him because we need him to follow Trump.
There was an argument, wait till 28, and there's some merit to that. But I think
okay, Greg Swenson, Dr. Jan Halber-Hayes, we're going to have to leave it there. We could talk about this all day.
Till
I certainly could.
Good to be here.
Thank you.
Right, well, do stick with us, though, because we're going to be discussing all the jargon and the baffling acronyms you need to survive the workplace, apparently. You're watching Breakfast on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back. It's coming up to 8:44. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Anne and Martin.
Right, let's go through the newspapers, shall we, with our headline makers. We've got the wonderful David Hamilton with us and also the wonderful Emma Wolfe. I'm trying to be equal there with my praise.
You did well,
Thank you
did
so
well.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
haven't called me legendary yet.
No, that'll come
for
next,
him.
yeah. Well, you have to be your age to be legendary.
I think so.
I think legend is a polite word for old, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, it is.
All right, we'll skip over that. But actually, talking of age is where we want to start, because we're very proud to say that there's an extraordinary programme starting tonight here on GB News at 9 o'clock. And it's called the Dinosaur Hour. And it's John Cleese. He is going to be in charge of the Dinosaur Hour, talking to fascinating people. Here he is. Have a look at this, talking with journalist Matthew Syed.
I would say, and this is based on deep personal experience, we've got so much better in this country.
Yes, we have.
I think we're one of the most, possibly the most progressive, racially tolerant countries in the world. I'm never, ever conscious of
You'll
my...
have to be very careful of saying that, because we're not supposed to admit anything's getting better.
But this is a tragedy to me.
Yeah.
I think the story of racism in this country is a good news story over the course of my lifetime. Relative to other nations, we're doing tremendously well. It is absurd to compare ourselves to the United States, for example.
Yeah.
It still has deep-seated cultural problems, and we're making great progress. Are we But to say that we've made progress, people say, that means you think it's perfect. I don't think it's perfect. Nothing is perfect.
Nothing's ever going to be perfect.
But look at how well certain ethnic groups are doing in this country.
Let's try and make things a bit better here and there.
Absolutely. I tell you what, Joe, I feel a tremendous sense of gratitude. When my father, you know, even in the 60s, you know, Harold Wilson introduced the Race Relations Act. Actually, that was in that was in the 70s. But there was progressive legislation. That's why I stood for Parliament. I stood for Labour. I thought that, you know, this was a really wonderful thing to do.
Stand.
In 2001, years ago, thousands, millions of white people have wanted to do the right thing and have marched and have campaigned. And I think we've got to a place now where if anybody said, as they used to say to me, you know, with brown skin, that you're slightly inferior, you have a genetic congenital defect relative to white, no one says that now.
I'm very proud that you're able to think that we've made these strides in England. Britain, sorry.
Undoubtedly we have. Undoubtedly, hey.
Wonderful, wonderful Matthew Syed.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Brilliant, brilliant man talking to John Cleese. And I think that's going to be the power of the Dinosaur Hour, is the fact that because he's John Cleese, he can pull in some really brilliant guests to talk to.
Yeah.
And then just chat to them.
And just chatting. I love the fact that there was space to breathe and just talk about a topic. It's not boom, 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 and the next thing, and the next thing. It's just two people talking. Almost in a pub, there was like a pirate in the background.
Yeah, there was a pirate
there was a pirate
and two
and
nuns.
fluffy cats.
Yeah.
Fluffy cats, drinks.
You feel like you've wandered into a
I must
pub.
say, it looks absolutely brilliant, and it's going to be at 9 o'clock tonight.
Stephen Fry is going to be guest, Trevor MacDonald, Chris Tarrant. So a lot of big names, but time to expand those conversations, really get into it. And it feels like you're inviting to a private conversation in a kind of eavesdropping way, in a really nice way.
And something that I don't know whether I would have expected that, I mean, John Cleese is clearly, you know, a TV person and film person for years and years and years and years. But I don't know whether I expected him to be quite such a good interviewer.
Yeah.
You know, because the magic of a good interviewer is you allow your guest to shine.
Right.
Yeah. And he seems to be doing that. So that looks promising.
Absolutely. Tonight at 9 o'clock.
Tonight at 9 o'clock here on GB News.
Yeah. OK, Emma, moving on to your story, FYI, what's the right jargon to use in the office? It's a total minefield, this.
It is. It's all these baffling acronyms. I can't even say the word acronyms at this time in the morning. There's been a survey of thousands of office workers basically saying everybody's baffled by all this stuff. You know, OK, we know working from home. Do you know what FWIW?
For what it's worth?
For what it's worth. WOM?
No.
Word of mouth. I mean, some of them are a bit, would we really use them? WIIFM. What's in it for me?
What's in it for me?
What's in it for me? It's not something I think that people text each other, but anyway, this is the new thing, all these baffling...
Well, I got LOL wrong for years.
Did you? What do you think it was?
I thought it was lots of love.
Yeah. LOL.
That would be better.
I'm not the only one. It's David Cameron thought it was lots of love.
Laugh out loud?
Laugh
out loud, yeah.
The least understood one is NRN.
NRN?
Not right now.
Yeah, I guessed that one immediately, NRN.
Not right now.
Would you use it, though, Martin? Would you text someone NRN?
I think all of these things are treacherous.
They are all a bit weird.
I think we should use real words. Maybe I'm a dinosaur too.
I'm a dinosaur because I punctuate my
I
WhatsApp.
think we should stop it ASAP.
ASAP. Well, that one's off. Anyway, it turns out that baby boomers over 55s and 18 to 24-year-old Generation Z, no one understands acronyms. It's not an age thing. Loads of people are saying in this survey that they don't understand them and they're all a bit random and weird and baffled by all this stuff. You know, it's hardly going to hold you back if you don't know what word of mouth means.
I understand that for brevity, if you're texting, you want to compress things, but using them in conversation, I think, is a huge offence.
I know, a friend of mine asked me to come along to something, and she said, "Are you coming?" And I wrote back OFC.
Yeah, that's definitely, of course.
She went silent for ages, and then she came back and said,
didn't know what you meant.
"Please just tell me what OFC means."
By the way, we're not sounding like dinosaurs, are we?
No, not much.
Things like LOL, which laugh out loud, it's sort of become something more than just an acronym. It's sort of it's a special kind of language if you say LOL in a text. It's funny. Some of them work, some of them don't.
Well, talking of age, that's just what you were going to say, isn't it? David, tell us about the Rolling Stones.
Like minds think alike. Yeah, the Sunday Times, according to the Sunday Times today, the Rolling Stones have become the first billion-pound band. Now, in recent years, they've made most of their money from their tours.
Yep.
But they've got a new album out. Have you heard the album?
Yeah,
have you heard it?
It's really good. They're back to their pomp and prime.
It is fantastic. Jagger sounds about 35. He's still...
still sing, can't he?
He's still in great voice.
Might be AI.
And the album is called Hackney Diamonds. Do you know what it means?
That's what I'd see. What's
Hackney
Hackney Diamond?
Hackney Diamonds is actually shattered glass, as in windscreen.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. And it's outselling all the other albums. I'm playing it every day on my radio show, and it's
really good.
People are loving it. Yeah,
Hackney Diamonds.
Yeah.
And there you are. We're showing pictures of them at the moment if you're listening on the radio.
Bill Wyman is back on one.
I mean, they're looking their age a bit more now, but they are sounding terrific.
Actually,
I say they're looking their age. How old is Mick Jagger now?
He's 80. About 80, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's still really
He does
cool.
not look 80.
I think that is aspirational old man cool.
They're setting the bar so high now. You're doing the same.
Wonderful energy.
Yeah.
That's what Jagger's got, that incredible energy. And love of money.
Yeah, well, it's definitely working. It definitely pays to be a dinosaur if you're the Rolling Stones.
Well, yeah.
Emma, moving on to this story, which caught our eye all morning, front page of the Mail. This is in relation to some of the protesters at the pro-Palestine march. One of them, a firebrand leader, is an extremist Islamic group, also works as an NHS GP, the jihadi GP.
This man has been living quietly, well, not quietly, actually. He's been living and working in the London suburb of Harrow for the past 20 years as a family doctor, and is actually the head of Hizb ut-Tahrir in the UK. This man, this isn't like... Do you remember a week or so ago, the Hamas leader who was revealed to be living in Barnet in a council house that he'd fully paid off, had got a whopping great discount for it?
£112,000 discount.
Yep, in the most Jewish borough of London, in the whole of the UK.
And he's a Hamas leader?
In between two synagogues.
He was over there.
He was a former Hamas leader. He'd been out to Putin to have chats with Putin.
Came into Britain on a fake passport of a relative.
Yeah, at the beginning of the 2000s, and had recently gone out to Moscow to have chats with Putin. It was unbelievable. Anyway, this guy is a GP who only the other day, he's been on these protests, only the other day, he called the October the 7th attacks a very welcome punch on the nose to Israel. This man is living in this country, serving gay people, Jewish people, all sorts of people, as a family doctor, in Harrow.
Now, we believe in freedom of speech, David, of course, in this country, but how would you feel if you were a Jewish person and that was your GP?
Well, no wonder you can't find a doctor. You know, they're all doing something else, aren't they? A lot of them are now working privately.
I don't know whether you'd have to be Jewish to be shocked by that.
No,
I'd be shocked if I found out my GP was that person.
I think if you are Jewish, it's a very, very worrying
it's more of a
time.
shock, isn't it?
No, it's a horrible time, really, and it's really absolutely awful.
Emma.
But we know their extremist views on females, on gays, on Jews. This is this is very, very concerning that this man, who is pictured here on the demo last week and here outside his surgery, if that was my family GP, he's using two names. He's living a double life. It's not like the former Hamas leader who seemed to have quietened down in the past 2 or 3 years.
OK, I mean, I'm only playing devil's advocate here. If he does his job well, and by all accounts, people say he's a very good GP, if he's doing that job well, is that so very wrong?
I find it disturbing that he is active in these protests right now and is saying things like those Hamas terror attacks were a very welcome punch on the nose to Israel, when we know what happened on October the 7th.
Yeah. I think a lot of people would concur.
After that, it's up to patients to choose, I suppose.
A lot of people would concur with that. David, on to a story here about the complaints system. Because what a lot of people don't know is if you complain to the BBC, it doesn't go via Ofcom first. It goes through their own internal complaints mechanism, and they tend to try and bury it before it even gets to Ofcom. Tell us, there's a shake-up, isn't there, coming?
Yeah, keep it in-house. The BBC apparently has toughened its complaints system amid concerns from ministers that allegations of bias are not being taken seriously. They're thinking in particular of the hundreds of complaints that they've received about their handling of the Middle East crisis and refusing, for example, to call Hamas terrorists. They won't use that expression. It's funny, isn't it? You know, it's so easy to knock the BBC, but I remember the days, and Anne, you will as well, when the BBC was regarded worldwide as the finest purveyor of news. And the BBC World Service was something that was a voice that was heard and respected everywhere. And I think there's been a sort of left-wing element that's crept in there.
There's wokery, isn't it?
It's wokery.
It's trying to be seen to do the right thing.
And it's
paranoia about ever expressing any views. I mean, doing anything on the BBC, which I do a lot, is exhausting because there's this constant obsession with balance when we're talking about
But the big question is this: should the BBC be allowed to mark their own homework, or should they be subjected to Ofcom as other channels are?
Why isn't it an independent review when things go wrong, which they are increasingly doing?
I think that's the
They
big
get
question.
themselves caught up in all sorts of
messes. It probably have to be from now on, won't it? Because they have to come under such
it would help them.
criticism. It would help them.
It would help them get a distance.
The funny thing about the BBC is that nobody seems to love them anymore, which I find very sad, because there was a time that we loved our national broadcaster very much.
I'd still stick up from where I possibly could, and I know you would. But we've got to leave it there. We've come to the end of our time. Thank you so much. It's been brilliant to see you.
Never got to our psychic air hostess, but it's front page of the Star.
Mystery. Maybe we'll try and solve it in the next few minutes. But yeah, right. I think we've got weather. Have we got weather? No, we're not going to the weather. Do stick with us, because in a few moments we'll be back with you and we'll bring you up to date with the very latest news. You're watching Breakfast.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's
my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m. Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good morning, it's 9 o'clock on Sunday the 29th of October. Here are the stories that we're covering on Breakfast today. In shock news that came in overnight, Friends star Matthew Perry died aged just 54. The US-Canadian actor, best known for his iconic role as Chandler Bing in Friends, was found dead at his home, and tributes are pouring in from all over the world.
And now to Israel. The second stage of the invasion has now begun. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel's ground invasion of Gaza will signify a long and difficult war. Mark White is in Tel Aviv with all the latest.
Well, the Israeli Defense Forces have said that 450 Hamas targets have been struck by Israeli fast jets in the past 24 hours. But still, the Hamas rockets keep coming into Israeli communities around the Gaza Strip.
And in London, 100,000 people turned out yesterday to protest Israel's bombing of Gaza, calling for a ceasefire on humanitarian grounds. 9 people were arrested, with some incidents being treated as suspected hate crimes.
And Labour at the heart of a nepotism row as the Partygate investigator Sue Gray's son joins the running to become a candidate at the next general election for the Labour Party. And that's as divisions continue to grow over the party's stance on the conflict in the Middle East.
And then across the Atlantic, Donald Trump took aim at Joe Biden, calling him totally incoherent, claiming the Israel-Hamas war would never have started if he were president. And that's something that we've been debating as to whether he should become the next Republican nominee.
And of course, Rachel Ayres will have your weather forecast.
Persistent rain across Scotland today and sunshine and showers elsewhere with some blustery winds. Join me later for a full forecast with all the details.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Anne Diamond.
And I'm Martin Daubney, and this is Breakfast on GB News.
And And so all I can say is I'm very sorry if you've just joined us. You've just woken up, turned the telly on a Sunday morning, because there is some very sad news around. We've heard overnight that the American-Canadian actor, comedian and producer Matthew Perry, who was probably best known for his role on the US sitcom Friends, well, he has died. Reports are suggesting that he drowned at his home in his jacuzzi.
Yeah, the 54-year-old died at the actor's home in Los Angeles after LA police received a call around 4 p.m. local time.
And sources say there's no apparent foul play and no confirmed cause of death, but the investigation, of course, is now ongoing.
Well, joining us now is the executive producer and comedy scriptwriter Dan Warren and our showbiz reporter Stephanie Tachi. Stephanie, shall we start with you? A lot of people out there are going to be hugely shocked by this because the fact of the matter is people have been saying to us all morning they've grown up with Friends, 10 years, 1994 to 2004, left a huge legacy of work and a massive loss.
Definitely, Martin. Matthew Perry was a friend of Hollywood, but also he was a friend to the viewers who have watched Friends for almost over 10 years. The show ended 15 years ago.
But we're all still watching it.
People still watch the reruns of it because it feels such a show where they've actually become your friends. And Matthew Perry playing Chandler Bing, it's almost he became our own friend as well. And people have been also, it's almost like Friends had this cult-like following because it came at an era where comedy was allowed to be comedy, and that chemistry between those actors you cannot deny. It's almost if they were friends on screen and off screen, which they are. So I can imagine that they are devastated waking up this morning to hear the passing of Matthew Perry. As you can imagine, Hollywood has woken up in shock. He did do Friends, but he also starred in other movies as well. So even though he was known for Friends, he had so many friends in Hollywood. Selma Blair has said, "He was my oldest boyfriend. I am broken-hearted. Sweet dreams, Matty." Warner Brothers, who produced the show for its entirety, says that the impact of his comedic genius was felt around the world and his legacy will live on in the hearts of so many. And we've also had Prime Minister Trudeau, who's also said Matthew Perry's passing is shocking and saddening.
Yes, he actually went to school with Justin Trudeau.
Did. Justin Trudeau.
And his mother worked for Pierre Trudeau.
Yeah.
Which, but I think for us ordinary people, he was just one of our friends, wasn't he?
He was, and he was very honest about his battles with drinks and drugs. You know, he says for about 3 seasons of Friends, he couldn't remember anything that he was filming because he was addicted to Vicodin at the time. And he, you know, even over the past few years, he's gone through so many surgeries to repair his colon.
Something like 17.
17 surgeries, and he's also had stints in rehab. But I think it doesn't overshadow his work.
But I tell you what, shall we take a little look at him at his best? I think this is just one of those lovely zany moments where he's happy, got up on the coffee table and sort of did that.
This guy was me, and it was me who had learned that it was me who was the best you'd ever had. I'd be going like this. But I'll tell you, that's the last time I'm going to buy shoes at the Slippery Fun shoe store.
Just try not to move your feet at all.
Oh.
There you go.
Chandler, I'm gonna have you arrested. Why? You stole my move.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah, that's the stuff.
Do we dare?
We dare.
Oh.
Superb stuff.
Oh, it makes you sad watching it, but those were amazing moments. Actually, Dan, you're as a comedy writer, you'll understand how sometimes it was just physical comedy, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then they use it just like they're sitting in a chair, and that's what we work with Friends. It was not a complicated premise. It was just so simple, and it's just simple gags, but with the right sort of tightness, if you like, of the visuals with the script and their timing. It's a perfect success.
And you were saying earlier, one of the reasons, apart from the great actors and the great chemistry, it was such a success, was it had the best script writers in all of America and a massive team of them polishing the gems continually to get that final product that came onto the screens.
Absolutely, 20 plus in the room at the same time. constant rewrites, and that's one thing that as a comedy writer, if you write something until it's literally been released, there is always time to improve it. It's always to sharpen it up, and basically, you know, I think Friends, roughly it's about every 30 seconds there's some form of gag, and that was there. You know, if you're watching, you will never get bored.
And of course, it wasn't canned laughter; it was filmed in front of an actual audience, and that involvement, that spontaneity, that connection with the audience was key to the comedy delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're performing to an audience, it's completely different. You get that you know, you get the sort of response immediately, and know where you're going with the joke. If you're doing it in an empty room, you don't know if it's got legs, and you can tell sometimes, you know, some of the cast members, and they left it in, actually broke down laughing and trying to cover up things with their hands because they generally, you know, lost it on set, and that means it's working.
In fact, some of the funniest bits are the bloopers, the outtakes, and there are loads and loads and loads of them where they're just laughing so much they literally can't even talk.
Indeed, and I mean, it's one of those we were saying about how it was it's shown around the world. I think every long-haul flight I go on, there's always the Friends option.
Yes, you're absolutely
I'm
right.
always like, oh, well, that's great, that's me sorted for the rest of the flight. It's one of those easy things.
It is, yeah. I know them so well I can go to sleep to them now, which is wonderful.
You never get bored of watching a rerun of a Friends episodes. It still feels very relevant, and it's very nostalgic, as a lot of our viewers have been saying today. And even when we saw the Friends reunion a few years ago, people really wanted them to record more episodes, and I can imagine the cast today are just feeling very sad.
They would be devastated,
and upset because it's.
But I think it was fans all over the world. I mean, that's what came through in the Friends reunion. They went all over the world filming ordinary fans who said how much it mattered to them.
Because you grew up with it. It was always in your living room, and it brought this sense of laughter, which is very far and few between these days.
And there's a great point. It's what Jackie wrote into us earlier and said that her earliest memory was her 6-year-old daughter singing the theme in a car to Blackpool. She then met her boyfriend, who became her husband, who also was a Friends fan, and then they had their wedding, and they reenacted a Friends wedding and totally baffled the vicar. But it goes to show you just how connective that was throughout their lives.
Yeah, and I think when talk about the theme tune, it's so iconic, and that was the second choice. It was never supposed to have been the remembrance.
Is that right?
It's supposed to be REM and Shiny Happy People.
Oh, really?
That's the original theme for Friends.
Well, yeah, the music, which you can just hear now, it's absolutely iconic too.
You can't imagine it without it.
No, you can't. Well, they chose right, didn't they?
Yeah.
It was brilliantly written. It was brilliantly directed and produced, as you can tell. But I think it's just those 6 people. You just grew to love them.
Yeah.
And it's very sad that we've lost one now.
It is, and I think it's definitely before his time. Like, in the reports, he was saying he was playing pickleball just 2 hours before. So I can imagine over the next few weeks we'll be finding out more on what's happened.
We'll find out, I guess, but what a way to go. It's just terribly sad, and I know a lot of people just feel that sadness. But I'll bet you a lot of people watching right now, even though you're feeling sad, you'll go and find it somewhere, won't you, and play it.
I think there'll be a huge uptick today in people searching these episodes out. There are loads of best bits on YouTube. I was doing that earlier. As I said, the bloopers. There's a bit where they're carrying a sofa up the stairs.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, and Schwimmer goes, pivot, pivot.
Pivot.
And then Perry stands up and goes, shut up, and it's just so... And they just break down in hysterics. They can't even continue the scene. The audience are losing their minds. It's so funny, and that was natural. You can't script that, and you can't make it up.
But I tell you what, it's also brilliant. Now we're beginning to think it's where we just showed it a little bit earlier, where he and Joey had those lazy boy chairs, and just the sheer movement of sitting back on them, they went and that was being there you go. That was being a young man in the 90s, wasn't
Everybody wanted one of those lazy boys.
Yes, they did. They must have sold them out.
Yeah.
Well, R.I.P. is all you can say, Matthew Perry. You went too soon, but you were our friend, as we say there. Oh, thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Steph.
OK, let's move on to serious stuff. Equally sad, of course, but very serious stuff. We move on to what's happening in Israel. And this is fascinating because breaking with historical norms, they never normally get involved. The International Committee of the Red Cross has called for a humanitarian pause, that's what they're calling it, in the fighting in Gaza.
And that's as the Israeli Prime Minister says we are now entering the second phase of the war as the Israeli Defence Forces claim to have struck more than 450 targets in Gaza overnight.
But in a relief to many, some phone lines and internet connections have returned apparently to Gaza. Israel cut them off yesterday.
And we can cross now to our security editor, Mark White, live from Tel Aviv. Mark, what's all the latest?
Well, that bombardment really continuing. It continued all throughout the night, and again this morning there are reports of small arms fire, heavy machine gun fire from a number of locations inside Gaza. Israel confirming that its troops are on the ground. The invasion, as such, it has begun, but it's not perhaps what many people were expecting, which is tens of thousands of Israeli troops spilling over the border fence into Gaza. It's being done on a much more incremental basis with these raids, these incursions into areas of northern Gaza to take out Hamas positions that are firing anti-tank missiles, that are preparing other booby traps for the Israeli forces, and of course also to try to gather as much information as they can on the hostages that are still being held by Hamas, at least 229. Interestingly, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, met with families of some of the hostages yesterday. They wanted a guarantee that the hostages were his top priority. He wasn't able to give that guarantee. The top priority, he said, was the destruction of Hamas, but he did say that the fate of the hostages is absolutely uppermost in the minds of all of those Israeli soldiers who are going into Gaza to try to dismantle Hamas. Their release is a top priority, he said. There has been rocket fire that's coming out, though, from Hamas positions in the last hour or two, an indication that they still have the potential and indeed the willingness to fire back into Israeli civilian communities and those Israeli military positions around the Gaza Strip. And that's why I think it cements in the minds of the Israeli military and the war cabinet the need to go in on the ground to take them on and go down into that tunnel network eventually, because unless they do that, then there is no hope of achieving the overall goal, which is the destruction of Hamas.
OK, Mark, we'll leave you there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And obviously, Mark White will be on top of all of the news coming out of Israel for you throughout the day. There's a lot going on in the world of politics domestically as well. And on top of that is GB News presenter Camilla Tominey, who'll be with us a bit later on.
Good morning.
Hello, love your earrings.
Thank you very much.
That's not very political, but
No, thank you very much. A green goddess is the look I'm going for this morning, Anne.
You've achieved it.
In sync with Martin's tie.
You've got the memo.
It's been a really interesting week because on one hand we've got the Conservative Party sort of tearing themselves apart because of bad poll ratings. Peter Bone's recent suspension from the party. We'll discuss that on the show because he's been out seen canvassing this weekend with the Tory minister, but I digress. So we've got everything going on the Tory side, but then you've got the Labour Party tearing themselves apart over Israel and Palestine. In a way, I've got a bit of sympathy for Keir Starmer because he finds himself between a rock and a hard place, doesn't he? If he's too pro-Israel, he gets in trouble with the left-wingers in his party who might be more alarmed to Corbyn's stance on Palestine. But if he is indeed too pro-Palestinian, then he undoes all of the good work he has done to try and rid the party of the anti-Semitism associated with Corbyn.
Position for him, isn't
it? You've got a quarter now of Labour MPs. The latest is Shabana Mahmood. She is a Shadow Justice Secretary. She is a MP for Bethnal Green. She's saying that she's calling for a ceasefire now. So you've got a quarter of Labour MPs calling for a ceasefire, talk about resignations from the front bench potentially. I've got the best person on to discuss all this, Khalid Mahmood. He's the longest-serving Muslim Labour MP in Parliament. He's the one who brokered a meeting between Keir Starmer and Muslim MPs earlier this week. He's got the inside track on what the Labour leader is thinking and how they should play this moving forward. Of course, Starmer's going to be accused of flip-flopping. He said on a broadcast interview several weeks ago that he supported Israel's right to defend itself, and that included cutting off electricity and water supplies to Gaza. And if he appears to backtrack on that, again, he's going to inherit that nickname, Captain Flip-Flop.
OK, well, there's plenty to talk about on Camilla's show as well. OK, we'll be back in just a couple of moments with a special report for you on Halloween.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I. So you want higher taxes? Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back. It's 9:20 and you're watching and listening to Breakfast with Anne and Martin.
Now, spooky season is once again upon us, and the ancient town of Dorchester in Dorset is on a mission to beat the world record for the largest number of ghosts gathered at the same place at once. We sent our own Ghostbuster, Jeff Moody, along to see how they got on.
Come on, let's hear you. There are a lot of sheetless beds in Dorchester right now as the townsfolk come out for an early Halloween and an attempt to get into the record books. Organiser Tara Bailey is over the moon.
I'm absolutely delighted already with the turnout, and we've only been going a few minutes. We need 561 to beat the world record, and who knows, but it's looking very promising. Fingers crossed.
The previous record was set in 2017 at a school in Ireland. The hope today is the unquiet dead of Dorchester will frighten their way into the record books. It's something the mayor, Alistair Chisholm, thinks is apt for the town, considering its ghostly past.
I have for many years run ghost walks in Dorchester, and of course, being as ancient a place as it is, going way back into prehistory and the Stone Age, over the years, thousands and thousands of people have lived and died here, and inevitably some of them don't rest easy. And for years we've been hunting them out on ghost walks. And so this event, to celebrate Halloween, when the divide between the living and the dead is paper thin. And I thought, I've got to be part of this.
It's part of a Halloween fun day organised by Discover Dorchester. So the record attempt for the most amount of ghosts in one particular place is 560. I'm not sure they're going to beat that today. The rain hasn't been particularly kind, but everyone is certainly having a good time, and there are plenty of ghosts. Plenty, but not quite enough. There were 204 ghosts and ghoulies wafting through Brewery Square, meaning the world record still belongs to Ireland. But as the good people of Dorchester pack away their sheets, all eyes are on next year, when, if the rain holds off, they'll try and snatch the world record once again. Jeff Moody, GB News.
Well done, Dorchester, for trying, but isn't that a big waste of sheets?
Yeah,
isn't it?
cutting holes in all those sheets.
That reminds me of a scene from Friends. Monica has a beautiful doll's house that's been given to her, and Phoebe comes round with some dolls to put in it, and of course they're all the wrong size and everything. And there's one little one which is just like a little ghost. It's like a little hanky on a finger. And she says, that's a ghost for the attic. And Monica says, I don't want a ghost in my house. And Phoebe says, nobody wants a ghost in their house.
And I certainly don't. I've got to confess, Anne, I'm a bit bar humbug about Halloween. Kids knock on my door all the time. My kids love it. They go out and get... even though the mum is obsessed with having carrot sticks, it seems to be like a one-night
The rest of the year you've got to eat healthy, but on Halloween you can eat absolutely anything.
When they knock on my door, must confess, I put a jar of sweets outside, I bolt the door, I go in the kitchen, I have a glass of vino.
Yes, that's probably the best way to do it, I think. I don't know, I always thought it's a sort of rather silly tradition that I know it's not American, it actually comes from Europe, doesn't it?
I didn't know that.
And then it was Americanised, and then we imported it, and I don't really know why. We've got better things to do, like putting effigies of Guy Fawkes on bonfires. No, maybe not that either. Anyway, I do hope that if you're celebrating Halloween, it'll be Tuesday night, won't it?
It will.
That you have a jolly good time anyway. Don't eat too many sweets. But, well, that's all the wise words from us. Do stay tuned, because Camilla Tominey's coming up next.
Good morning, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So the first half of the weekend was fairly unsettled, but what will Sunday bring? Well, last night's rain is now across northern England and Scotland, bringing some fairly heavy and persistent rain here for much of the day. Elsewhere, it's a mixture of sunshine and showers, and these will be most frequent and heaviest